She had 3 hours before they found her. 3 hours before the council's hunters picked up her scent on the wind, before the hounds started baying in the valley below, before they dragged her back to the village square and made an example of what happens to wolves born wrong. Born different. Born cursed. Martha pressed her bleeding palm against the rough bark of the ancient oak, her breath coming in ragged clouds that dissolved into the freezing rain. The forest didn't care that she was dying. The storm didn't pause for broken girls with nowhere left to run. And that's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the thunder or the relentless drumming of rain against leaves. A groan. Low. Pained. Human, but not quite. The mountain forest had become a cathedral of violence. Rain hammered down through the canopy in sheets, turning the ground into a treacherous maze of mud and exposed roots. Every crack of thunder felt like the sky splitting open, like the world itself was trying to shake her loose and send her tumbling back into the hands of those who wanted her dead. Martha had been running for 2 days. 2 days since the elders had called her before the council. 2 days since they'd seen the silver marks spreading up her arms like frost creeping across glass. 2 days since the high priestess had whispered the word that sealed her fate. Abomination. Her legs trembled as she stumbled forward, boots skidding in the slick earth. The wound on her side burned, a parting gift from the border guard who'd tried to stop her escape. His claws had raked deep, and though her wolf had already begun knitting the flesh back together, the pain still sang through her ribs with every breath. She should have kept running. Should have put more distance between herself and the village. Should have disappeared into the wildlands where even the pack hunters feared to follow. But that sound, that broken, desperate groan, it pulled at something deep in her chest, something she'd thought the council had beaten out of her years ago. Compassion. Martha changed direction, her instincts screaming at her to stop, to think, to protect herself for once. But her feet carried her forward anyway, drawn by an invisible thread she couldn't name. The forest opened into a small clearing where the rain fell harder, unobstructed by the canopy. And there, collapsed against the moss-covered stones of what might have once been a shrine, was a man. No, not just a man. Even half dead and covered in blood, she could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. It pressed against her senses, made her wolf whimper and pace anxiously beneath her skin. Every instinct told her to back away slowly, to leave him to the storm and whatever fate had brought him here. But then she saw his face. The rain had washed away most of the blood, revealing features that seemed carved from some artist's fever dream, all sharp lines and brutal beauty. His dark hair was plastered to his skull, and his clothes, what remained of them, were shredded beyond recognition. Claw marks. Bite wounds. Burns that looked like they'd come from silver. Someone had tried very hard to kill him. Martha's healer instincts kicked in before her common sense could stop her. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his chest, assessing the damage. 3 broken ribs. Punctured lung. Deep lacerations across his torso. A silver burn on his left shoulder that had begun to fester. He would be dead by morning. The thought should have brought relief. One less predator in the world. One less wolf to hunt girls like her. Instead, it made her chest ache. She reached for him, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his rain-soaked skin. The moment she touched him, his eyes snapped open. They were the color of winter storms. Gray and silver and crackling with something that might have been lightning or might have been fury. Those eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that froze the air in her lungs. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain continued its assault. Thunder rolled across the mountains. And Martha knelt in the mud beside a dying stranger whose gaze held her captive like chains. His lips moved. She had to lean closer to hear the words, so quiet they were almost lost to the storm. Run. The words scraped out of his throat like gravel, like it cost him everything he had left to give. Run, before they find you. Here. But Martha didn't run. She'd been running her whole life. Running from the whispers. Running from the fear in her packmates' eyes. running from the destiny that marked her skin in silver and made the elders call her cursed. Something about this moment, this stranger, this impossible choice in the middle of a storm that felt like the world ending, made her want to stop running. Made her want to stay. "Let me help you," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the rain. His storm-gray eyes widened slightly, as if those 4 words were more shocking than the wounds carving him apart. As if kindness was a language he'd forgotten how to understand. She didn't wait for permission. Martha slid her arms beneath his shoulders, biting back a cry as the movement pulled at her own injuries. He was heavy, all muscle and coiled strength even in his broken state. Every instinct screamed that moving him was dangerous, that touching him was madness, that everything about this was wrong. But she'd been called wrong her entire life. Might as well earn the title. There was a cave she'd spotted earlier, a shallow indent in the cliff face about 50 yards north. Not much shelter, but better than dying in the open. She half-dragged, half-carried him through the mud, her boots losing purchase more than once, sending them both sliding in the slick earth. He didn't make a sound. Even when his wounds reopened and fresh blood painted dark trails across the ground. Even when she knew every movement must be agony. He stayed silent, those intense eyes fixed on her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. By the time she got him into the cave, Martha's muscles were screaming and her vision had started to blur at the edges. She lowered him as gently as she could onto the rocky ground, then collapsed beside him, her chest heaving. The rain continued outside, a curtain of water that turned the world gray and distant. For a long moment, she just breathed. Then she forced herself to move. Her supplies were limited, what little she'd managed to grab during her escape. But she had clean water in her canteen, strips of cloth that could serve as bandages, and a small tin of salve her mother had made before everything. She worked in silence, cleaning the wounds with practiced efficiency. Her hands steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. Despite the growing awareness that this man was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Power leaked from him like water from a cracked vessel. It filled the small cave, pressed against her skin, made her wolf pace and whine. This wasn't just any wolf. This was something older. Something stronger. Someone important. When she pressed the salve into the silver burn on his shoulder, his hand shot out and caught her wrist. The grip was weak, trembling, but the intent was clear. "Who are you?" His voice was stronger now, rough as stone grinding against stone. Martha met his eyes, saw the suspicion there, the confusion, the pain he was trying to hide. "Nobody," she said quietly. "Just someone who couldn't leave you to die." Something flickered across his face. An emotion she couldn't name. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that guarded intensity. His fingers loosened on her wrist, but didn't release completely. "They'll kill you for this." They were already going to kill me. The words came out more bitter than she intended. So I might as well do something decent with whatever time I have left. His eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke again. "Thank you." 2 words. Simple. Plain. They landed in her chest like stones in still water, sending ripples through places she'd thought had gone numb. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice, and went back to work. Outside, the storm raged on. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard the baying of hounds. The council's hunters, drawing closer with every passing hour. She had maybe until dawn. And in the flickering shadows of a cave barely large enough for 2 broken wolves, Martha made a choice that would change everything. She would save this stranger. Even if it damned her. Even if she never learned his name. Even if the kindness she showed tonight became the beginning of a story written in blood and moonlight and the kind of love that sets the world on fire. Some stories begin with destiny. Others begin with a choice made in the rain by a girl who had every reason to be cruel and chose kindness instead. If you want to know what happens when mercy meets fate, you might want to stay close. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Dawn came slowly, like the world was reluctant to witness what the night had hidden. Martha hadn't slept. She'd kept watch instead, her back pressed against the cold stone wall of the cave, her eyes fixed on the stranger whose chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. The rain had finally stopped sometime in the dark hours before morning, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt more threatening than the storm. She could hear them now. The hunters. Their calls echoed through the valley, distant but drawing closer. They were methodical, patient, the way predators are when they know their prey has nowhere left to run. She counted at least 5 distinct voices. Maybe more. The council had sent a full hunting party. For her. A wolfling who'd never even completed her first shift. A girl they'd called broken, cursed, wrong since the moment the silver marks had appeared on her 13th birthday. The stranger stirred, pulling her attention back. In the thin gray light filtering into the cave, she could see him more clearly now. The wounds she'd cleaned and bandaged in the dark looked less severe than they'd felt beneath her fingers, but that only made the wrongness more apparent. He was healing too fast. The claw marks that should have taken days to close were already knitting together. The burns that should have festered were forming new skin. Even his breathing had deepened, steadied, like his punctured lung was repairing itself while he slept. Whatever he wasn't ordinary. His eyes opened without warning, snapping from unconsciousness to full awareness in a heartbeat. No grogginess. No confusion. Just that instant, terrifying alertness that marked an apex predator. Those storm gray eyes found her immediately, locked on with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke, his voice still rough but stronger than it had any right to be. You stayed. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. An observation. A puzzle piece that didn't fit. You were dying, Martha said quietly, keeping her distance, her muscles coiled to run even though she knew it would be useless. If he wanted to hurt her, she'd never make it out of the cave. Most would have considered that a blessing. He pushed himself up slowly, his jaw tightening against what had to be considerable pain. The bandages she'd wrapped around his torso were spotted with blood, but holding. Who are you running from? The question was too specific. Too knowing. Martha's wolf bristled beneath her skin. How do you? You have the look. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an attention that felt like being dissected. Hunted. Desperate. And that wound on your side is fresh. Claws, not teeth. Someone tried to stop you, but wasn't committed enough to kill. Border guard. Her silence was answer enough. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it held any humor. So we're both outcasts tonight. Fitting. You're not an outcast. The words came out before she could stop them. She gestured at him, at the power that still radiated from his skin like heat shimmer. Whatever you are, whoever you are, outcasts don't heal like that. Outcasts don't carry themselves like they own the ground they stand on. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Respect? It was gone too quickly to name. Perceptive. He moved to stand and Martha tensed, ready to bolt. But he only braced himself against the cave wall, his movements careful, controlled. Testing his limits. What's your name? She shouldn't tell him. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to lie, to give a false name, to maintain what little anonymity she had left. But he'd already seen the silver marks on her arms. Already felt her touch when she'd healed him. Already witnessed her choosing compassion over survival. What was one more vulnerability? Martha. He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. The way he said her name made something low in her belly tighten with an awareness she didn't want to acknowledge. Martha. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. The healer from Thornridge Pack. The world tilted. How do you know that? Her voice came out sharper than intended, edged with fear and something close to anger. How do you know who I am? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant, like he was calculating how much truth to give her. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the air in the cave feel heavier. Because I make it my business to know about wolves marked by silver. About bloodlines that haven't manifested in 300 years. About prophecies that terrify councils enough to exile children. His eyes refocused on her, pinning her in place. About you. The confession hit her like a physical blow. You've been watching me. It wasn't a question. The certainty settled into her bones like ice. Why? Who sent you? The council? The northern packs? Are you here to finish what they started? No. The word was flat, absolute. I'm here because 3 weeks ago, my scouts reported unusual activity near Thornridge. A girl being brought before the elders. A trial that wasn't announced publicly. And then whispers about an execution order for a crime the council wouldn't name. He took a step closer, and Martha's back hit the cave wall. I wanted to see for myself what could frighten them so badly. So you just, what? Followed me? Watched me run for my life and did nothing. The anger felt good, cleaner than the fear. She clung to it. Is this entertainment for you? Tracking broken wolves like there. I wasn't following you. His voice cut through hers, quiet but sharp enough to draw blood. I was tracking the council's hunters, making sure they didn't catch you before. He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Before what? He looked away, and for the first time since waking, she saw something other than calculated control in his expression. Something raw, uncertain. Before I could decide if the prophecies were real, if you were real, he exhaled slowly. And then I ran into problems of my own. The wounds. The silver burns. Someone had ambushed him. Who did that to you? Martha asked, her anger dimming into something more complex. Curiosity. Concern. The dangerous pull of wanting to understand the stranger who'd apparently been haunting the edges of her disaster of a life. Enemies who thought they saw an opportunity. His smile was cold, predatory. They were wrong. They almost killed you. Almost. He pushed off the wall, moving closer, and Martha's breath caught. He was tall. She had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see the scars that marked his skin beneath the fresh wounds. Old battles. Old pain. A history written in violence. But then you found me. You could have kept running. Could have left me for the crows. Instead, you saved my life. Anyone would have. No. The word was soft, but carried absolute conviction. They wouldn't have. Most would have seen an opportunity. Searched my body for valuables. Slit my throat to put me out of my misery, or left me to suffer as payment for whatever crimes they imagined I'd committed. His hand lifted slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed against her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. But you gave mercy to a stranger in the rain. You spent your supplies on someone you'd never met. You stayed when any sane person would have run. His touch sent heat spiraling through her, warring with the cold fear that had been her constant companion for days. She should pull away. Should put distance between them. Should remember that she knew nothing about this man except that he was dangerous and he'd been watching her. Instead, she found herself asking the question that had been burning in her chest since he'd first spoken her name. Who are you? The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Outside, a hunting horn sounded. Closer now. Maybe a mile away, maybe less. His hand dropped from her face, and something in his expression shuddered closed. Someone who's going to make sure you survive the day. He moved toward the cave entrance with a fluid grace that belied his injuries. The hunters are half an hour out. We need to move. Martha stayed frozen against the wall. You don't owe me anything. I helped you, and now we go our separate ways. That's how this works. He looked back at her, and the expression on his face was complex, layers of things she couldn't parse. Determination. Frustration. Something that might have been hunger if she let herself believe it. You're right. I don't owe you anything. His voice dropped lower, intimate in a way that made her skin prickle. But I'm not leaving you to them, Martha. Not when I've spent weeks trying to reach you. Not when you're the first person in a decade to look at me like I'm something other than a weapon or a throne. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. I don't understand, she whispered. I know. He extended his hand toward her, palm up. An offering. A choice. Trust me anyway. Every rational thought screamed at her to refuse. She didn't know him. Didn't know his name or his intentions or why he'd really been watching her. Didn't know if walking out of this cave with him would save her life or end it faster. But there was something in his eyes. Something desperate and honest beneath all the predatory control. Like he was asking for permission to be more than whatever monster the world had made him. Like he needed her to say yes as much as she needed someone to say she was worth saving. The hunting horn sounded again. Closer. Martha pushed off the wall and crossed the cave in 3 quick steps. Her hand slid into his, and the moment their skin touched, something electric shot up her arm. Not painful. Not quite pleasant. Just significant. Like a door opening in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and absolutely certain. "Stay close," he said quietly. "And when I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him she wasn't some helpless thing that needed protecting. But the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about her being weak. This was about him needing her to be safe. So she nodded. And followed the mysterious stranger out of the cave, into the morning light, with the sounds of hunters drawing closer and her hand still wrapped in his. Not knowing that the man whose life she'd saved was the same Alpha King whose name made warriors tremble. Not knowing that her mercy had just rewritten the fate of every pack from the mountains to the sea. Not knowing that some bonds, once formed, could never be broken. Even by blood. Even by betrayal. Even by the weight of crowns and prophecies and all the violence the world could throw at 2 wolves who'd found each other in the rain. They moved through the forest like ghosts, his hand never leaving hers. Martha tried to focus on the terrain, on placing her feet carefully to avoid snapping branches or disturbing the carpet of wet leaves. Tried to listen for the hunters, to gauge how close they were, how much time she had left before everything ended in blood and judgment. But her mind kept circling back to the same question. How did he know? The silver marks weren't exactly subtle. They traced up both her forearms in patterns that looked almost like frost or flame, depending on the light. But Thornridge was a small pack, isolated in the northern mountains, far from the politics and power plays of the larger territories. Nothing that happened there should have mattered to anyone beyond their borders. Certainly not enough to draw the attention of someone like him. Someone who moved like death and spoke like he was used to being obeyed. Someone whose hand in hers felt like the most dangerous and the safest thing she'd ever held. The memories came without permission, the way they always did when she let her guard down. Slipping through the cracks in her defenses like water through stone. She'd been 13 when the marks first appeared. It happened during the Harvest Festival, in front of the entire pack. One moment she'd been dancing with the other young wolves, laughing at something her friend Mara had whispered. The next, a burning sensation had crawled up her arms like liquid silver beneath her skin. She'd screamed. Not from pain, though there was pain, bright and sharp and all-consuming. She'd screamed because she could feel something waking up inside her. Something vast. Something that didn't fit inside her child's body. Something that wanted out. The music had stopped. The dancing had ceased. Every eye had turned to watch as Martha collapsed in the center of the clearing, her skin lighting up like starfire, silver marks blooming across her flesh in patterns that the elders would later call forbidden. Her mother had reached her first, gathering Martha into her arms while the pack recoiled. While the whispers started. Cursed. Marked. Wrong. The council had convened that very night. Martha remembered being carried into the elders' hall, still trembling, still burning, her mother's tears falling onto her face. She remembered the high priestess stepping forward, her ancient eyes going wide as she traced the patterns on Martha's arms. And then the priestess had spoken the words that would define the next 5 years of Martha's life. The Silver Wolf bloodline. Blessed Mother protect us, the old blood has awakened. Blessed would have been nice. Blessed would have meant celebration, reverence, maybe even a place of honor. But the fear in the priestess's voice had made it clear that whatever had awakened in Martha was anything but a blessing. She'd learned the history in fragments, pieced together from overheard conversations and the few books in their small pack library that mentioned the Silver Wolf line. 300 years ago, wolves marked by silver had been the protectors of their kind. Healers and warriors both, blessed with abilities that set them apart. They could mend wounds that should have been fatal, could call on a power that manifested as silver flame, could shift into forms that the legends described as breathtaking and terrible in equal measure. But power always came with a price. The Silver Wolves had been hunted to extinction during the Purge Wars. Some said they'd grown too powerful, too dangerous, and the other bloodlines had united to destroy them before they could claim dominion over all shifter kind. Others whispered that the Silver Wolves had been corrupted, that their power had twisted into something dark and consuming. No one knew the truth anymore. The records had been destroyed, the histories rewritten. All that remained were the warnings. Never trust a wolf marked by silver. The old blood runs mad. They'll burn everything they touch. Martha's childhood had ended that night in the harvest clearing. The other children had stopped playing with her. Parents had forbidden their sons and daughters from getting too close to the cursed girl. She'd been moved to the edge of the village, to a small cottage that might as well have been a prison. Her mother had tried. Spirits knew she'd tried. She'd held Martha through the nightmares, had taught her to hide the marks beneath long sleeves and careful postures, had spent every coin they had consulting with healers and wise women, searching for a way to suppress the power that grew stronger with each passing year. But fear was stronger than love in Thornridge Pack. When Martha turned 16, they'd tried to force her first shift during the lunar rites. Every young wolf was supposed to transform beneath the full moon, to embrace their animal form and join the pack properly. Martha's shift had gone wrong. She remembered the pain, worse than the marks appearing, worse than anything she'd ever experienced. She remembered feeling her bones begin to break and reform. Remembered the silver fire igniting in her blood. Remembered the terror in the elder's eyes as her body started to change into something that wasn't quite wolf and wasn't quite human. Remembered her mother screaming for them to stop, to let her daughter go, to show mercy. They drugged her instead, forced her shift back before it completed, left her broken and gasping on the ritual ground while the pack looked on in horrified silence. The high priestess had declared her too dangerous to complete the transformation, too unstable, too cursed. The old blood wants to manifest, the priestess had said, her voice carrying across the gathered wolves. But she's too weak to contain it. If we allow the shift to complete, the power will consume her. Consume us all. They'd forbidden her from ever attempting to shift again. Had bound her with silver bracelets that burned against her skin and suppressed her wolf. Had made her an outcast in her own home. Her mother had died 2 winters later. A hunting accident, they'd called it. But Martha had seen the truth in the careful way the pack avoided her eyes at the funeral. Had heard the whispers that maybe it was a mercy. That raising a cursed daughter had broken something in her mother's spirit. That maybe she'd walked into that snowstorm on purpose, seeking the peace she couldn't find in a village that feared her child. Martha had stopped crying after the burial. Stopped hoping that things would get better. Stopped believing that anyone would look at her and see something other than a mistake that should have been prevented. She'd learned to make herself small, quiet, useful enough to keep alive, but not noticeable enough to remind them of what she carried in her blood. She'd learned to survive. And then, 3 weeks ago, everything had changed. A child had fallen through the ice on the northern lake. By the time they'd pulled him out, he wasn't breathing. His lips were blue, his small body frozen solid. Martha had been gathering herbs nearby. She'd heard the mother's screams and had run without thinking. She dropped to her knees beside the child, and her hands had moved before her mind could catch up. The silver marks on her arms had flared to life, glowing beneath the suppressant bracelets. Heat had poured from her palms into the child's chest. And he'd gasped, coughed up water, started breathing again. She'd saved his life. The mother had looked at her with gratitude for exactly 3 seconds before terror replaced it. Before she'd snatched her son away from Martha like proximity alone might corrupt him. Before she'd run, screaming for the elders, calling for help. They'd convened the council that very night. And this time, there had been no discussion of containment or suppression. The high priestess had looked at Martha with something worse than fear. She'd looked at her with certainty. The power is manifesting despite the bindings. She'll only grow stronger, more unstable. The old woman's voice had carried the weight of judgment and finality. We can't risk it. The prophecies were clear about what happens when the old blood fully awakens. We must act before she becomes what her ancestors were. You mean a healer? Martha had found her voice, had forced herself to stand tall even as the guards closed in around her. Someone who saves lives instead of taking them? We mean a weapon, the priestess had said quietly. One that doesn't discriminate between enemy and kin. The silver wolves didn't die out because they were peaceful, child. They died because they burned so bright they incinerated everything close to them. Even the ones they loved. The execution order had been signed that night. Martha had escaped 3 hours before dawn, fighting past the border guard who'd tried to stop her. She'd run bleeding into the forest with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope that somewhere beyond Thornridge's borders, there might be a place where being different didn't mean being disposable. A sharp tug on her hand pulled Martha back to the present. He'd stopped walking, his body tense, his head tilted slightly as he listened to something she couldn't yet hear. They're close, he said quietly. A quarter mile, maybe less. Moving fast. Fear spiked through her, sharp and familiar. I cannot run them. The admission tasted like defeat. Even if I could shift, which I can't, they're trained hunters. You're just the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to keep running. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it didn't match the deadly focus in his eyes. You're just the first silver wolf I've encountered in person. You're just the answer to questions I've been asking for 5 years. That drew her up short. 5 years? You've been searching for. Later. He turned to face her fully, his free hand lifting to cup her jaw. The touch sent electricity skittering across her skin. Right now, I need you to understand something. They're not taking you. I don't care how many hunters they sent. I don't care what crimes they think you've committed. You're under my protection now. You don't even know me. But even as she said it, Martha felt something loosening in her chest. Something that had been locked tight since her mother died. Since before that, maybe. Why would you risk yourself for? Because you didn't leave me to die in the rain. His voice dropped lower, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. Because you looked at me like I was worth saving when I was covered in blood and broken beyond reason. Because everything I've heard about silver wolves says you should be cold, ruthless, consumed by power. But you spent the night keeping watch over a stranger instead of saving yourself. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Martha's breath caught. Because maybe, he whispered, we're both tired of being treated like monsters for things we can't control. The words landed in her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She wanted to ask him what he meant. Wanted to demand answers about why he'd been searching for silver wolves, why he cared, who he really was beneath the mystery and the danger. But the hunting horn sounded again, so close now that she could hear the hounds baying. His jaw tightened. He pulled back, but kept her hand firmly in his. When the fighting starts, he said, his voice shifting into something harder, something that carried command like other people carried breath, you stay behind me. Don't argue. Don't try to help. Just stay alive. Can you do that? Martha wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him she wasn't some delicate thing that needed shielding. That she'd survived 5 years of being Thornridge's worst nightmare. That if she was going to die today, she'd rather go down fighting than hiding. But the look in his eyes stopped her. This mattered to him. Her safety mattered in a way that didn't make sense, that couldn't make sense after a single night in a cave. So she nodded, and watched as something shifted in his expression. As the gentle stranger who'd accepted her mercy transformed into something else entirely. Something that made her wolf, trapped and restless beneath the suppressant bracelets, whimper in recognition. The trees ahead of them rustled. 5 wolves emerged from the underbrush, their forms massive and deadly in the morning light. Martha recognized the lead hunter, Marcus, the council's enforcer. His dark fur was streaked with gray, his amber eyes fixed on her with the kind of certainty that came from never losing a hunt. Behind him, for more hunters fanned out in formation. Professional, efficient, inescapable. Marcus shifted back to human form, his transformation smooth and controlled. He stood naked and unconcerned in the weak sunlight, every line of his body carved from decades of violence. Martha Thornridge, his voice carried across the clearing like a judge pronouncing sentence. By order of the Council of Elders, you are to return to the pack to face execution for crimes against the natural order. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. She felt the stranger's hand tighten on hers, felt the air around him begin to shift, to thicken with power that made her skin prickle. She's not going anywhere with you. His voice was quiet, conversational even. But something in it made Marcus's eyes widen, made the other hunters take an involuntary step backward. Recognition dawned on the enforcer's scarred face. His body went rigid. You, Marcus breathed, and for the first time in Martha's life, she heard fear in the unshakable hunter's voice. They said you were dead. The ambush in the Western Territories. Clearly, the stranger said softly, they were mistaken. And then he spoke the words that shattered Martha's world into pieces. I am Kelvin Silvercrest, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Lord of the Six Packs, and Guardian of the Moon-blessed Throne. His voice carried power now, command that made the very air vibrate. And this woman is under my personal protection. Touch her, and I will consider it an act of war against the crown. Martha's heart stopped. The Alpha King. The most feared ruler in 3 generations. The wolf who'd unified the Northern Territories through blood and strategy. The name that mothers used to frighten children into obedience. She'd saved the Alpha King. And he'd been watching her. Searching for her. Protecting her. As the hunters hesitated, torn between their orders and their survival instincts, Martha looked up at the stranger, at Kelvin, and saw him glance down at her with an expression that was part apology, part challenge. As if asking whether knowing his name changed what had bloomed between them in that cave. Whether she'd still trust him now that she knew what he was. Whether mercy could survive truth. The hunting party began to circle, and Martha realized with crystal clarity that nothing would ever be simple again. The name hung in the air like thunder before lightning strikes. Kelvin Silvercrest. The Alpha King who'd conquered the Northern Territories not through birthright but through blood. The ruler who'd ended the pack wars by being more ruthless than every enemy who'd challenged him. The wolf whose reputation preceded him like winter, cold, inevitable, and deadly to anyone foolish enough to stand against him. And Martha had bandaged his wounds with strips of her spare shirt. Had touched him with gentle hands while he bled out in the rain. Had looked at him like he was just a man who needed saving. The hunting party had gone absolutely still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way this moment would break. Marcus stood frozen in his half-crouch, his amber eyes flicking between Kelvin and Martha like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. My king. The enforcer's voice had lost its certainty, replaced by the careful neutrality of someone navigating a minefield. We were not informed that the Thornridge matter concerned the crown. The council received no communication. The council, Kelvin interrupted softly, doesn't dictate where I travel or who I choose to protect. Last I checked, Thornridge falls within my territories. Which means your little execution order requires my approval. His eyes went cold as winter steel. Did you seek that approval, enforcer? The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus's jaw tightened. Behind him, the other hunters shifted uneasily, their wolf forms rippling beneath their skin as instinct warred with training. Run or submit. Fight or flee. There was no winning scenario here, and they all knew it. The girl is cursed, my king. The high priestess herself confirmed. I don't recall asking for your council's superstitions. Kelvin's voice could have cut glass. I'm telling you how this ends. You return to Thornridge and inform your elders that Martha is no longer their concern. She's mine now. My responsibility. My judgment to make. But the prophecy is also no longer your concern. Something shifted in Kelvin's posture, subtle but unmistakable. The air around him thickened with power, with the absolute authority of an alpha who ruled not because of tradition, but because nothing alive could challenge him and survive. You have 10 seconds to start running, Enforcer. I suggest you use them. Marcus held his ground for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then his survival instincts won over his pride. He shifted back into wolf form in a blur of muscle and fur, and the hunting party scattered into the forest like leaves before a storm. The silence they left behind felt fragile, like reality hadn't quite caught up to what just happened. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. She was still processing. Still trying to reconcile the wounded stranger from the cave with the king who'd just dissolved a death sentence with 6 words. She pulled her hand from his. Kelvin turned to face her, and for the first time since his eyes had opened in that cave, she saw something other than control in his expression. Uncertainty. You lied to me, Martha said quietly. I never lied. His response was careful, measured. I just didn't tell you everything. You let me think you were. She gestured helplessly at him, at the space where the hunters had stood. You've been watching me for weeks. You knew exactly who I was, what I was running from, and you just, what? Decided to see what would happen if you played wounded stranger. No. The word came out sharp, almost angry. The wounds were real. The ambush was real. I nearly died in that clearing, Martha. Everything after that, you choosing to save me, to stay, to trust me, that was real too. But you knew. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun breaking through the canopy. You knew I had no idea who you were. You could have told me. Could have identified yourself when I asked your name. Instead, you let me touch you, heal you, confess things to you, While I what? He took a step toward her, and she took one back. Something painful flickered across his face. While I experienced what it felt like to have someone look at me without fear. Without calculation. Without seeing the crown or the power or the blood on my hands. His voice dropped lower, rough with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How impossible. That doesn't make it right. I know. He stopped advancing, giving her space even though everything in his posture said he wanted to close the distance between them. I know it doesn't. But I'm not going to apologize for wanting one night where I got to be something other than a king. Where someone chose to help me because they were kind, not because they wanted something from me. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and complicated. Martha wanted to stay angry. Wanted to hold on to the betrayal burning in her chest. But she could see the truth in his eyes, in the tension of his shoulders, in the way he looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying in equal measure. He'd been alone, just like she had. Different circumstances, different prisons. But the same bone-deep isolation. Why were you looking for me? She asked finally. You said you've been searching for silver wolves for 5 years. Why? Kelvin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Because of a prophecy I can't afford to ignore. And a shrine I need you to see. He extended his hand again, palm up. An offering, just like in the cave. Trust me a little longer, Martha. Please. Let me show you why I've been searching. Why you matter more than just being a hunted girl with silver marks. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. To put distance between herself and this king who'd already proven he kept secrets. Who commanded armies and ended lives and wore power like a second skin. But beneath the anger and the fear, something else whispered. He came for you. He protected you. He stood between you and death without hesitation. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to know why. Martha took his hand. They walked for over an hour, moving deeper into the mountains where the forest grew ancient and wild. The trees here were different, massive things that must have been growing since before the pack wars, their bark silvered with age, their branches reaching toward the sky like prayers frozen in wood. Kelvin moved with purpose now, no longer the wounded stranger, but the king who knew his territories like other people knew their own heartbeat. He kept her hand in his, their fingers interlaced, and Martha tried not to think about how right it felt. How natural. How dangerous. Where are we going? She asked when the silence stretched too long. Somewhere that hasn't been accessed in 300 years. Somewhere your ancestors sealed before they died. He glanced at her, his gray eyes unreadable. Somewhere that started opening 3 weeks ago. The same time she'd saved the drowning child. The same time her power had manifested despite the suppressant bracelets. A chill ran down her spine. The forest opened into a clearing that stole Martha's breath. It wasn't natural. Nothing about this place was natural. The trees formed a perfect circle, their branches interweaving overhead to create a living cathedral. In the center stood ruins, the remains of what must have once been a temple. Pillars carved from white stone that seemed to glow faintly in the dappled sunlight. An altar cracked but still standing. And everywhere, silver symbols etched into stone and bark and earth. The same symbols that marked Martha's skin. What is this place? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. The shrine of the first flame. Kelvin released her hand slowly, watching her face. The sacred ground where the silver wolf bloodline began. Where the first of your kind was blessed or cursed, depending on which history you believe. Martha took a step forward, then another. The silver marks on her arms began to warm, to pulse with a light that matched the symbols surrounding them. The suppressant bracelets at her wrists started to smoke. Kelvin, panic crept into her voice. It's all right. He was beside her in an instant, his hands steady on her shoulders. The shrine recognizes you. It's been waiting for you. I don't understand. Why would it wait for me? I'm nobody. Just a broken wolf who can't even shift properly. You're not broken. His voice was fierce, absolute. You're exactly what you're supposed to be. What the prophecy said would come. He guided her toward the altar, and Martha's feet moved without conscious thought. The closer she got, the stronger the pull became. Like invisible threads wrapped around her ribs, drawing her forward, drawing her home. The altar's surface was covered in more symbols, these ones forming words in the old tongue. Martha had learned enough from her mother to recognize some of them. Fire, blood, moon, awakening. And carved deeper than the rest, surrounded by a circular pattern that made her eyes ache to look at directly. She who bears the silver flame shall rise when all hope is ash. She who is cast out shall return crowned in starfire. She who they named cursed shall be their salvation, or their ending. No. Martha backed away from the altar, shaking her head. No, that's not about me. That can't be about me. I'm not anyone's salvation. I'm just... You're a silver wolf whose power is manifesting despite every attempt to suppress it. Kelvin moved around the altar to face her, his expression intense. You're marked with symbols that match this shrine perfectly. You saved a life 3 weeks ago, and that same night, these ruins, which have been dormant for 3 centuries, started glowing. My scouts saw it from 5 miles away. Silver light pouring into the sky like a beacon. He gestured at the clearing, at the temple, at the symbols burning brighter now in response to her presence. This place has been waiting for you, Martha. Not for a silver wolf. For you specifically. Your bloodline. Your power. He paused, his voice softening. Your choice. What choice? The words came out broken. I didn't choose any of this. I didn't choose to be born with these marks. I didn't choose to have power I can't control. I didn't choose to be hunted and exiled and told I'm dangerous just for existing. I know. Kelvin closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. But you can choose what happens next. You can choose to run from this, to keep hiding, to let the fear win. Or you can choose to understand what you are, what you could become. And what's that? She was crying now, hot tears tracking down her cheeks. A weapon? Isn't that what everyone keeps saying? That silver wolves were weapons that destroyed everything around them. You're not a weapon. His thumbs brushed away her tears. You're a healer who saved a dying child. Who spent your supplies on a stranger? Who gave mercy when the world taught you cruelty? His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Martha's breath hitched. Whatever power runs in your blood, Martha, it doesn't define you. Your heart does. And your heart is the kindest thing I've encountered in a decade of war. The words cracked something open in her chest. Something that had been frozen since her mother died. Since before that, maybe. Since the first time someone had looked at her like she was a monster instead of a child. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. His voice was soft against her skin. But you're not alone anymore. Whatever this prophecy means, whatever your power wants to become, you don't have to face it by yourself. Why do you care? The question had been burning in her chest since the cave. Really? Kings don't protect random wolves out of kindness. So why? What do you want from me? Kelvin pulled back enough to look into her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath stop. Hunger. Not physical, something deeper. More desperate. Because 5 years ago, my mate died. The confession was quiet, devastated. She was killed in an attack meant for me, and when she died, I felt like something essential in me died with her. I've spent 5 years being exactly what my enemies feared. Cold. Ruthless. Empty except for strategy and violence. His hands trembled slightly against her face. And then 3 weeks ago, my scouts brought news of a silver wolf whose power had manifested. I started researching, diving into prophecies I'd ignored because they seemed like myths. And every single text said the same thing. That when the silver wolf bloodline awakens, it means change is coming. Either salvation or destruction, but change that will reshape everything. He smiled, sad and small and achingly human. I needed to know which one. Needed to see for myself if the prophecy was real or just another legend. So I came looking for you. Expecting. I don't know. A warrior. A weapon. Something that matched the fear in everyone's voices. And instead, you found a broken girl running for her life. I found someone who made me feel something other than emptiness for the first time in 5 years. His voice cracked. I found kindness when I'd forgotten what it looked like. I found someone who sees the world the way I used to, before the crown and the blood and the endless politics turned me into something I barely recognize. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way that seemed impossible for a king. I don't know what the prophecy means, Martha. I don't know if you're meant to save us or end us. But I know that when I'm near you, I remember what it felt like to be more than a weapon myself. To want to protect something instead of just destroy. To hope. The confession settled into Martha's bones like warmth after freezing. She understood. Maybe better than anyone could. The loneliness of being seen as something other than human. The weight of expectations and fear. The desperate hunger for someone to look at you and see you instead of what you represent. She lifted her hands and covered his where they still cradled her face. I don't know how to be what the prophecy wants, she said quietly. I don't know how to be anyone's salvation. I can barely control my own power. Then we figure it out together. Kelvin's thumb traced along her cheekbone. No more secrets. No more hiding who I am or what I need. Just two wolves trying to understand what fate is asking from us. Martha wanted to say yes. Wanted to fall into the safety he offered, into the promise of not being alone. But the rational part of her brain whispered warnings. He's a king. You're a fugitive. This can't end well. This can only end in pain. Before she could answer, the altar behind them flared to life. Silver light erupted from the carved symbols, shooting upward in a column that pierced the canopy. The suppressant bracelets on Martha's wrists shattered, falling away in pieces of smoking metal. And the marks on her arms blazed so bright she had to close her eyes against the glare. Power flooded through her veins like liquid starfire. Not painful. Not exactly. Just vast. Like something massive had been compressed inside her chest and was now expanding, filling every cell, claiming every breath. She heard Kelvin shout her name, felt his arms wrap around her as her legs gave out. And then the vision hit. Fire. Everywhere fire. A battle raging across familiar territory. She recognized the valley north of Thornridge, recognized the mountains in the distance. But the land was burning. Wolves fighting wolves. Blood soaking into earth that glowed with silver light. And in the center of the carnage, a figure wreathed in flame. Her, or something wearing her face. Silver fire poured from her hands, from her eyes, from the marks on her skin. It consumed everything it touched. Friend and enemy alike. The power didn't discriminate, it just burned. And she was screaming. Not in rage. In agony. Like the fire was eating her from the inside out. The vision shifted. Different scene. Same figure. This time she stood on a cliff overlooking the territories, and the silver marks covered her entire body. She was magnificent. Terrifying. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. And kneeling before her, heads bowed in submission, were wolves from every pack. Including Kelvin. His eyes in the vision were empty. Broken. Like whatever had made him had been burned away, leaving only obedience. The vision fractured. One more image. Quick. Devastating. Martha cradling Kelvin's body while silver fire raged around them both. His eyes open and lifeless. Her screaming a sound that shattered mountains. She came back to herself on her knees in the grass, Kelvin's arms tight around her, his voice in her ear repeating her name like a prayer. Martha. Martha, come back. I've got you. Come back to me. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The power that had flooded through her was retreating now, settling back into her bones, but she could still feel it. Vast and patient and waiting for permission to rise. I saw. Her voice was barely functional. I saw the prophecy. Both versions. Salvation and destruction. Kelvin pulled back enough to see her face, his expression fierce with concern. What did you see? Fire. She gripped his arms, needing the anchor of something solid. So much fire. I was burning everything. Everyone. I couldn't stop it. And you were. Her voice broke. I killed you. In the vision, I killed you. Something complicated moved across his face. Not fear. Something worse. Resignation. Like he'd already considered that possibility and made his peace with it. Then we make sure that's not the future we choose, he said quietly. Prophecies aren't mandates, Martha. They're warnings. Possibilities. Roads we can take or avoid. But what if I can't control it? The terror was clawing up her throat now. What if everyone was right to fear me? What if I am cursed, and this power really does destroy everything I touch? Then I'll help you learn control. His hands framed her face again, forcing her to meet his eyes. That's why I'm here. That's why fate or the moon or whatever force drives this world brought us together. You don't have to face this alone. You don't understand. I understand that you're terrified. I understand that the world has given you every reason to fear your own power. But I also understand that you're the woman who chose mercy over survival. Who saved a child despite knowing it would expose you? Who bandaged a stranger's wounds instead of running for your life? His voice dropped to something fierce and tender. That heart doesn't disappear just because you're powerful, Martha. It just means you have the strength to protect what you love instead of just grieving what you've lost. The words sank into her like light into darkness. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that there was a version of this story where she didn't become the monster everyone feared. But before she could respond, a howl echoed through the forest. Not the hunters returning. Something else. Something that made Kelvin go absolutely rigid, his head snapping toward the sound. No. The word was barely a breath. Not here. Not now. What is it? Martha tried to stand, but her legs were still shaking from the vision. Kelvin helped her up, his movements gentle but urgent. Enemies I thought I'd lost in the ambush. They must have tracked me here. How many? His expression went cold, distant. The king replacing the man who'd held her through the vision. Enough. He turned to her, and she saw the decision forming in his eyes. You need to run, Martha. There's a cave system half a mile east. Hide there until. I'm not leaving you. The words came out before she could think them through. This isn't a debate. His voice carried command now, absolute authority. These wolves aren't like the hunters. They're trained killers, and they're here for me. I can handle them, but not if I'm worried about protecting you too. I can fight. You can barely stand. His hands tightened on her shoulders. Please. I just found you. I'm not watching you die before we even understand what this is between us. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Before Martha could answer, the first wolf burst into the clearing. Then another. Another. 6 in total, all massive, all radiating the kind of violence that came from being weapons first and wolves second. And leading them, shifting back to human form with a smile that promised pain, was a man Martha recognized from whispered stories. Corvin Blackthorn, the exile prince who'd tried to claim Kelvin's territory 5 years ago, who'd supposedly died in the attempt. Apparently, like Kelvin's death in the Western Territories, the reports had been exaggerated. Brother, Corvin said, his voice carrying false warmth. I heard you were injured. Thought I'd come check on you. Make sure you were, recovering properly. Kelvin shifted his body to put himself between Martha and the threat, his posture radiating lethal intent. Corvin. No warmth in Kelvin's voice. Just ice and promise of violence. Still alive. How unfortunate. Corvin's eyes slid past Kelvin to fix on Martha, and his smile widened. And you brought a pet? How unlike you, brother. I thought you didn't do attachments anymore. His gaze traveled over her marks, and something hungry entered his expression. A silver wolf. Now isn't that interesting? The prophecy says whoever controls the silver flame controls the future of all packs. Martha felt Kelvin's power flare, felt the air itself start to vibrate with barely contained rage. She's not a weapon to be controlled. No, Corvin tilted his head, his smile never wavering. Then what is she? Your new mate? Your secret weapon? Or just a convenient source of power you're hoping to exploit? The question landed like a blade between them. Martha felt Kelvin tense, felt the complicated truth in his silence. He needs something from you. He said it himself. He came looking for the prophecy, not for you. That's what I thought. Corvin's voice turned to silk and poison. You're using her, just like you use everyone. Making her think she matters while you plan how to harness her power for your own ends. That's not Kelvin started, but Corvin cut him off. Isn't it? The exile prince addressed Martha directly now. Did he tell you he's been hunting silver wolves for 5 years? That he has ancient texts detailing how your ancestors' power can be bound and controlled? Did he mention that the king who commands a silver wolf's loyalty becomes effectively immortal? Unkillable. Each word was a nail in a coffin Martha hadn't known she was building. She looked at Kelvin, saw the truth warring in his expression. Is that true? Her voice came out small. Is that why you were researching? To find out how to control me? Martha, the anguish in his voice should have been reassuring. But he didn't deny it. You said no more secrets. Her chest felt like it was caving in. You said we'd figure this out together. But you were planning to bind me? To use me like I'm just another tool for your throne. It's not like that. Kelvin reached for her, and she stepped back. Pain flashed across his face. I was researching because I needed to understand what you were. What the prophecy meant. I never planned to. But you thought about it. The realization was ice in her veins. You thought about how useful I could be. How much power a tame silver wolf would give you. The silence was confirmation enough. Corvin laughed, the sound cruel and satisfied. There it is. The truth beneath all that pretty honor. He's just like the rest of us, little wolf. We all want to use you. The only difference is I'm honest about it. He gestured, and his wolves fanned out in formation. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me willingly. And in exchange, I won't kill your precious king. You can save his life again, just like you did in the cave. Prove that mercy of yours is real. Don't listen to him. Kelvin's voice was desperate now, all control abandoned. Martha, whatever I researched, whatever I thought before I met you, it changed. You changed it. You're not a weapon to me. You're... What? She was crying again, hot tears of betrayal and confusion. What am I to you, Kelvin? Really? He opened his mouth, closed it, and in his hesitation, she saw the truth he couldn't speak. He didn't know. He cared about her. That much was real. But somewhere beneath the care and the protection and the soft words, there was still calculation. Still strategy. Still a king who'd learned to see people as assets first and humans second. That's what I thought, Corvin said softly. Come on, little wolf. Let's leave the king to his conscience. See if it keeps him warm at night. Martha looked at Kelvin, saw the devastation in his eyes, saw him wanting to say something that would fix this, but not having the words. And she made a choice. Not because she trusted Corvin, she didn't. She could see the predator in his eyes, the manipulation in his smile. But because she needed space from Kelvin. From the confusion and the hurt, and the terrifying realization that she'd been falling for someone who might have been using her all along. If I go with you, she said to Corvin, you leave him alive. Unharmed. You and your wolves walk away from this clearing without drawing blood. Martha, no, Kelvin started forward, but Corvin's wolves moved to intercept, teeth bared. Agreed, Corvin said smoothly. You have my word as an alpha. The word of an exile was worth less than dirt, and they all knew it. But Martha was out of options and out of trust. She took a step toward Corvin, and it was like something broke in Kelvin's chest. She could hear it in the sound he made, raw and devastated and all too human. Please. His voice cracked. Martha, please don't do this. I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but please don't go with him. He'll hurt you. Use you worse than anything I ever considered. Please. She looked back at him one last time, memorizing the agony in his expression. You should have told me the truth from the beginning, she said quietly. You should have trusted me with all of it. I know. Tears tracked down his face now, the mighty Alpha King crying openly. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just please don't leave. Stay and hate me. Stay and scream at me. Stay and make me earn your trust back. Just stay. But she couldn't. Not with her heart breaking. Not with everything she'd thought was building between them revealed as something more complicated and painful. So Martha turned away from the first person in 5 years who'd made her feel like she mattered and walked into the custody of a smiling monster. Behind her, she heard Kelvin drop to his knees. Heard him say her name one more time, broken and desperate. And kept walking. Corvin's wolves surrounded her like a cage made of teeth and muscle. They moved through the forest in formation, 2 ahead, 2 behind, 1 on each side. Professional. Efficient. She was a prisoner, not a guest, despite Corvin's pretty words about choice and mercy. The exile prince walked beside her, close enough that his shoulder occasionally brushed hers. Every touch felt intentional. Invasive. A reminder that he could close the distance between them anytime he wanted. You made the right choice, he said conversationally, like they were discussing weather instead of her captivity. Kelvin would have used you up and thrown you away the moment you stopped being useful. That's what he does. It's what he did to his mate, and look how that ended. Martha kept her mouth shut, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Don't engage. Don't give him ammunition. Don't let him see how much his words landed in the wounds Kelvin had already opened. But Corvin wasn't finished. Did he tell you how she died? His precious Elena. The exile prince's voice took on a mocking tenderness. She was killed protecting him during a challenge. Threw herself in front of an attack meant for the king. And you know what Kelvin did? He stepped over her dying body and ripped out the challenger's throat. Didn't even stop to say goodbye. Didn't hold her while she bled out. Each word was a carefully placed knife. He avenged her, of course. Hunted down everyone involved in the attack. Made examples of them that still give alphas nightmares. But he never mourned. Never grieved properly. Just went cold. Corvin glanced at her, his expression almost pitying. That's the man you saved, little wolf. A king who cares more about power than people. Who'll tell you pretty lies about protection and partnership while planning how to leash you. And you're different? Martha heard herself ask despite her determination to stay silent. Corvin's smile widened. I never claimed to be good. I'm a bastard and an exile, and I own both titles proudly. But I'm honest about what I want. I want your power. I want to use it to reclaim what Kelvin stole from me. And I'm willing to make you a partner in that instead of a tool. A partner you're currently holding prisoner. A partner I'm protecting from making a terrible mistake. He gestured back the way they'd come. You think Kelvin will just let you go? The moment he regroups, he'll come for you. He'll say it's about rescue, about protection. But really, it's about control. About not letting a valuable asset slip through his fingers. The worst part was that Martha didn't know if he was wrong. Kelvin had researched binding rituals. Had admitted he'd been hunting silver wolves to understand the prophecy. Had hesitated when she'd asked what she meant to him. But he also cried when you walked away. He also begged you to stay. He also held you through the vision and promised you wouldn't face your power alone. Her thoughts were a war zone, and she was losing on all fronts. They walked for another hour before the trees opened into a camp. Rough structures made from canvas and wood. Weapons stacked in organized piles. More wolves, at least 20, scattered throughout the clearing, all of them watching Martha with expressions ranging from curiosity to hunger. An army. Corvin had built an army. Welcome to my humble resistance, the exile prince said, spreading his arms like he was presenting a gift. We're all outcasts here. Wolves who questioned Kelvin's rule and paid the price. Packs who refused to bow to his authority. Survivors of his conquests who want justice for what he took from us. He turned to face her, his smile sharp as a blade. And now we have you. The prophecy made flesh. The power that can tip the balance and end Kelvin's reign once and for all. Martha's skin prickled with warning. You said you wanted a partner, not a weapon. I do. Corvin stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. But first, I need to make sure you understand the stakes. Need you to see what kind of monster you've been protecting. He gestured, and two wolves dragged a figure forward from one of the tents. Martha's heart stopped. It was a girl, barely 16, covered in bruises and healing wounds. Her eyes were dull with the kind of trauma that destroyed souls. This is Sable, Corvin said quietly. She was part of the Clearwater Pack before Kelvin absorbed them into his territory. When her alpha refused to submit, Kelvin made an example, burned their village, killed the warriors, and took the young wolves as, let's call them insurance against future rebellion. Sable's dead eyes fixed on Martha, and she saw the truth there. Saw the broken pieces of a girl who'd lost everything to politics and power. Kelvin did this? The question scraped out of Martha's throat. Kelvin's orders. Corvin crouched beside Sable, his hand gentle on her shoulder. He doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. Doesn't have to. He just gives commands, and his loyal wolves carry them out. Then he sits on his throne and pretends his hands are clean. Rage bloomed in Martha's chest, hot and sharp. If this was true, if Kelvin really destroyed packs and imprisoned children, then he was exactly the monster the stories claimed. But something didn't fit. Why would he care about a prophecy then? Martha heard herself ask. If he's powerful enough to conquer and destroy, why would he need a silver wolf? Corvin's expression flickered, just for a moment, before the mask of sympathetic rebel slid back into place. Because even kings fear death. And the prophecy says a silver wolf's power can make its bonded alpha unkillable. Invincible. He stood, facing Martha with an intensity that made her want to step back. That's what he wants from you. Not partnership. Not protection. Immortality. The final piece that makes his rule absolute and eternal. The words landed like stones in her chest. But beneath the fear and the anger and the confusion, a small voice whispered. Kelvin had every opportunity to take you by force. To bind you while you slept in the cave. To use his authority as king and claim you as property. But he didn't. He asked for trust instead. I need time, Martha said slowly. To think. To process this. Corvin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Of course. You're not a prisoner here, Martha. You're a guest. An honored one. He gestured to one of the tents. Rest. Eat. Consider your options. And when you're ready, we can discuss how you want to use your power. For justice. For freedom. For all the wolves Kelvin has crushed beneath his crown. He walked away, leaving her standing in the center of the camp with 20 pairs of eyes watching her every move. Not a prisoner. The lie was almost insulting. The tent they gave her was small but clean. A bedroll. A basin of water. A plate of food that Martha couldn't bring herself to touch. She sat on the bedroll and pulled her knees to her chest, trying to organize the chaos in her mind. Kelvin had researched binding rituals. That was fact. He'd been hunting silver wolves to understand the prophecy. Also fact. He'd hesitated when she asked what she meant to him. Painful, but true. But he'd also stood between her and the hunters without hesitation. Had claimed her as under his protection before he knew if she'd reciprocate. Had held her through the vision and promised she wouldn't face her power alone. Had cried when she walked away. Kings didn't cry for weapons. They didn't beg tools to stay. And that meant either Kelvin was the best manipulator alive, or Corvin was lying about at least some of what he'd shown her. Maybe both. Martha pressed her hands to her face, feeling the silver marks warm beneath her palms. The power was still there, coiled in her chest like a sleeping dragon. Vast and patient and waiting. In the vision, she'd seen two futures. One where she burned everything. One where she stood powerful and terrible while the packs bowed. But maybe those weren't the only options. Maybe there was a third path. One where she learned to control her power. Where she became neither weapon nor victim, but something else entirely. The tent flap opened, and Martha's head snapped up. It wasn't Corvin. It was Sable, the traumatized girl from earlier. She stood in the entrance, her expression still hollow, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that might have been urgency. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Tonight. Before the ritual." Martha's blood went cold. What ritual? Sable glanced over her shoulder, then stepped fully into the tent, her movements quick and nervous. "Corvin's planning to bind you. Force a loyalty oath that will make your power answer to him. He's been preparing for weeks, ever since he heard about a silver wolf manifesting." The words confirmed what Martha's instincts had been screaming. "Then why are you helping me?" She kept her voice low, matching Sable's whisper. "Because you looked at me like I was a person." The girl's voice cracked. "Everyone else here sees me as a victim. A tool for sympathy. A reason to justify their revenge. But you looked at me like I mattered beyond what was done to me." Tears filled her eyes. "And because Corvin lied. About Kelvin. About what happened to my pack." Martha's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "Kelvin didn't burn our village. Corvin did." Sable wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. "He attacked us, killed our alpha, destroyed our homes. Then he told the survivors that Kelvin had ordered it. That we were collateral damage in the king's conquest." Most believed him. But I was there. I saw Corvin's wolves carrying the torches. Heard him laughing while my home burned. Horror and rage warred in Martha's chest. Why would he do that? To build an army against Kelvin. To create wolves desperate enough for revenge that they'd follow an exile into war. Sable's hands fisted in her worn shirt. He's been doing it for years. Attacking packs in Kelvin-esque territory and blaming the king. Creating enemies everywhere. Building toward this. Toward what? Toward you. Sable met her eyes, and Martha saw the terror there. He's going to use your power to destroy Kelvin. Then he's going to bind you so tightly you'll be nothing but a weapon he can point at anyone who challenges him. And when you've served your purpose, when there's no one left to fight. She swallowed hard. He'll kill you. Because he knows the prophecy works both ways. A silver wolf can make an alpha unkillable. But an alpha who kills a bound silver wolf gains their power permanently. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Corvin didn't want a partner. He wanted immortality and absolute power, just like he'd accused Kelvin of wanting. The difference was, Kelvin had asked for trust. Corvin was planning to take by force. How do I get out? Martha was already moving, already planning. There are guards at every exit. Corvin's wolves patrol the perimeter. Sable pulled something from her pocket, a small knife, barely longer than Martha's palm. But there's a gap in the watch rotation on the north side. 15 minutes when the guards change position. That's your window. Come with me, Martha said immediately. Sable shook her head. I'd slow you down. And if they realize I helped you, I can play broken and traumatized. They'll believe it. But you need to run, and you need to run fast. Where? Back to Kelvin. The girl said it with absolute certainty. Whatever his faults, whatever he's done, he's not this. He's not Corvin. And if the prophecy is real, if your power can really change everything, you need to be with someone who will at least hesitate before using you. Kelvin will hesitate. Corvin won't. It was the most damning and the most comforting character reference Martha had ever heard. She pulled Sable into a quick, fierce hug. Thank you. For the truth. For the risk. Thank you for seeing me. Sable pulled back, already moving toward the tent entrance. The watch changes in 10 minutes. North side. There's a game trail that leads back toward the mountains. Follow it, and it'll take you to the old shrine. She slipped out of the tent, leaving Martha alone with a stolen knife and a choice that would determine everything. Stay and become Corvin's weapon. Or run back to the king who might have been planning to use her, but at least had the decency to feel guilty about it. Not much of a choice. But it was hers to make. The camp was settling in for the night when Martha made her move. She'd waited, counting the minutes, watching through the tent flap as wolves bedded down and fires were banked. Corvin had visited once, bringing her fresh water and asking if she'd considered his offer. She'd played meek and confused, buying herself time. He'd smiled like he'd already won and left her alone. Now, with the moon rising and the watch change approaching, Martha slipped out of the tent like a ghost. The camp was laid out in a rough circle, with Corvin's tent at the center and the prisoners, because that's what they were, she saw now, kept on the eastern edge. The north side backed against dense forest, the tree line close enough that a fast runner could reach cover in seconds. If they made it past the guards. Martha kept to the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silver marks on her arms were warm, pulsing faintly with power that wanted to be used. She tamped it down, afraid that letting it rise would alert every supernatural sense in the camp. The guards were changing position. She could see them moving, 2 wolves heading away from the north perimeter while 2 more approached from the west. 15-second window. Maybe less. She ran. Her feet flew over the ground, silent as prayer, fast as desperation. The tree line rushed toward her. 10 feet. 5. A shout behind her. The silver wolf. She's running. Martha hit the forest at a full sprint, branches whipping at her face and arms. Behind her, she heard the camp erupt into chaos. Wolves shifting. Orders being shouted. The hunt beginning. She ran faster, pulling on reflexes she'd honed during 5 years of being unwanted. The game trail Sable had mentioned appeared ahead, barely visible in the moonlight. Martha followed it, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. A wolf burst from the undergrowth to her left, jaws snapping for her throat. Instinct took over. Martha threw up her hands, and silver fire erupted from her palms. Not like the vision. Not consuming and uncontrollable. Just a burst of light and heat that sent the wolf yelping backward, its fur singed. She kept running. More wolves now, coming from all directions. Corvin's voice shouting orders behind her, cold and furious. All pretense of partnership abandoned. Take her alive. I need her alive for the binding. Martha pushed harder, faster, the trail climbing now into the mountains. Her side ached where the border guard had clawed her days ago. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. She wasn't going to make it. There were too many of them, and she was too tired, too hurt too. A howl split the night. Different from the pursuit pack. Deeper. Older. Carrying authority that made every wolf in the forest freeze. And then Kelvin was there. He hit Corvin's wolves like an avalanche made of fury and teeth. Martha caught glimpses through the trees, silver-gray fur, eyes that glowed with power, movements too fast to track. He was magnificent and terrible, every inch the Alpha King who'd conquered territories through blood. But he wasn't alone. More wolves poured into the forest behind him. At least a dozen, all bearing marks that indicated royal guard. They crashed into Corvin's forces with brutal efficiency, and the night dissolved into snarling chaos. Martha kept running, following the trail upward, trusting that Kelvin could handle himself. A wolf appeared in front of her, blocking the path. Corvin in his shifted form, massive and scarred and radiating violence. He shifted back to human, his expression twisted with rage. You really think he's better than me? That king who was planning to bind you just like I was. Maybe not better. Martha's hands ignited with silver fire, and this time she didn't fight it. But at least he gave me a choice first. Corvin laughed, bitter and sharp. There's no choice, little wolf. There's only power and those strong enough to wield it. Let me show you. He lunged, fast as lightning. Martha threw fire. But she was exhausted, untrained. The burst went wide, and Corvin's hand closed around her throat, slamming her back against a tree. I was going to make this pleasant, he hissed, his grip tightening. Was going to let you think you had agency. But I'm done playing nice. Black spots danced across Martha's vision. She clawed at his hand, at his face, but he was too strong. Then Kelvin hit him like a wrecking ball. They went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, both shifting mid-fall. Wolf and wolf, alpha and alpha, fighting with a viciousness that suggested old hatred running deeper than politics. Martha collapsed against the tree, gasping for air, watching the battle unfold. They were matched in size and skill, both deadly, both relentless. They carved pieces from each other, blood painting the forest floor black in the moonlight. But Kelvin was fighting for more than territory. He was fighting like a man who'd already lost everything once and refused to let it happen again. With a move too fast to track, he got his jaws around Corvin's throat. One bite. That's all it would take. One crushing pressure and the exile prince would be dead. Kelvin's eyes found Martha's across the clearing. And she saw him asking permission. Saw him giving her the choice. Kill Corvin and end the threat permanently, or show mercy and risk him returning. Martha thought about Sable's hollow eyes. About the packs Corvin had destroyed to build his army. About the binding ritual he'd been planning, the death he'd promised once she served her purpose. End it, she whispered. Kelvin's jaws tightened. Corvin went still. The forest was quiet after the violence. Kelvin's wolves had driven off or captured the exile's army. The survivors were being escorted back to the capital for judgment. Sable was being carried gently by one of the royal guards, finally safe, finally free. And Martha stood in the clearing with the Alpha King, both of them covered in blood and ash and the residue of choices that couldn't be undone. Kelvin had shifted back to human form. He stood a careful distance away, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed closer. You came back, Martha said finally. I never left. His voice was rough, devastated. I followed your trail the moment you walked away. I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I fucked up by not telling you everything from the start. But I couldn't let him have you. Couldn't let anyone hurt you. Even though I might be useful to your reign? He flinched like she'd struck him. Is that what you think? That I only want you for power? I don't know what to think. Martha wrapped her arms around herself. You researched binding rituals. You came looking for the prophecy, not for me. And when I asked what I meant to you, you hesitated. I hesitated, Kelvin said quietly, because I was terrified of the answer. Because I've spent 5 years being empty, and then you appeared and made me feel everything all at once. Hope and fear and something that feels dangerously close to, he stopped himself, jaw tightening. To what? He looked at her, and the expression in his eyes was raw enough to hurt. To love. Or the beginning of it. Or the possibility of it if you don't run again. His voice cracked. I know I don't deserve it. I know I kept secrets and researched things I had no right to research. But I swear to you, Martha, I never planned to bind you. The moment I saw you in that clearing, saw you choosing kindness over cruelty, every plan I had dissolved. Because you weren't a prophecy. You were a person. Someone I wanted to know, to protect too. He stopped, turning away. I'll take you wherever you want to go. Give you resources to disappear if that's what you need. I won't force you into anything. Won't use my authority or my power. You're free, Martha. Completely free. Even from me. The offer hung in the air between them. Freedom. Safety. The chance to run and never stop running. Everything she'd wanted a week ago. But somewhere between the cave and the shrine and the moment Kelvin had torn through a forest to reach her, freedom had started meaning something different. I saw you in the vision, Martha heard herself say. Saw myself killing you, burning you, destroying everything while you knelt at my feet with empty eyes. Kelvin turned back, his expression complex. And I still came for you, he said simply. Knowing what the prophecy says. Knowing the risk. I came anyway. Why? Because some things are worth dying for. His eyes held hers, absolute and certain. And you're one of them. The confession settled into Martha's chest like light into darkness. She thought about Corvin's pretty lies and Kelvin's ugly truths. About manipulation versus honesty. About a king who'd researched control but chose to offer freedom instead. About the way he'd held her through the vision and cried when she walked away. About the possibility of writing a different ending than the prophecy demanded. I'm not ready to trust you completely, Martha said slowly. Not yet. You hurt me. The secrets hurt me. I know. Kelvin's voice was gentle. And I'll spend however long it takes earning that trust back. No more secrets. No more half-truths. Just honesty, even when it's ugly. And the binding research? Burned. I destroyed it the moment you walked away with Corvin. I don't want to control you, Martha. He stopped himself, smiled sadly. I want things I have no right to want yet. So I'll settle for keeping you safe until you decide what you want. It wasn't a declaration of love. Wasn't a promise of forever. But it was honest. And right now, honesty was worth more than pretty lies. Okay, Martha said quietly. Kelvin's eyes widened slightly. Okay, I'll come back with you. To your territory. Let you help me understand my power and what the prophecy means. She took a step closer, saw hope bloom in his expression. But we do this my way. No binding. No control. No using me as a weapon. Never. And you have to tell me everything. About your mate. About the packs you've conquered. About who you really are beneath the crown. Every ugly truth. His voice was rough with emotion. I promise. She took another step, close enough now that she could see the tears tracking through the blood on his face. And if I decide to leave, if this becomes too much, or if you break my trust again, you let me go. No hunting. No forcing. You just let me walk away. Something painful flickered across his expression, but he nodded. If that's what you need, yes. I'll let you go. Martha studied him for a long moment, searching for deception, for manipulation. She found only exhaustion and desperate hope and the complicated truth of a man trying to be better than his worst impulses. Then take me home, she said quietly. The word landed between them like a promise. Home. Not his territory. Not his palace. Home. Kelvin crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms, careful of her injuries, gentle despite his own wounds. His face buried in her hair, and she felt him trembling. Thank you, he whispered against her temple. Thank you for the second chance. I won't waste it. Martha let herself lean into his warmth, let herself accept the comfort, even as part of her heart stayed guarded. Trust would take time. Healing would take longer. But maybe, just maybe, they had time. The prophecy had shown 2 futures. Destruction or salvation. But standing in the forest with a broken king's arms around her and silver fire warming her veins, Martha thought maybe there was a third option. Maybe they could write their own ending. One choice at a time. One truth at a time. One moment of choosing each other over fear. It wasn't a guarantee. Wasn't even a promise. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were enough. Kelvin's territory was nothing like Martha expected. She'd imagined something cold and imposing. A fortress of stone and steel that matched the reputation of the king who ruled it. Something that screamed power and conquest and all the violence the stories attributed to his name. Instead, he brought her to a lodge nestled in the mountains, surrounded by ancient pines and a lake so clear it reflected the stars like scattered diamonds. The structure was large but felt organic, built from timber and river stone, with windows that let in the moonlight and fires that burned low and warm. It felt like a home, not a palace. Like a refuge, not a throne room. The royal guards who'd accompanied them from the forest dispersed to the surrounding buildings, giving them space. Sable had been taken to the healer's quarters, where she'd be tended and protected. The captured members of Corvin's army were being held in secure locations, awaiting judgment. And Martha stood in the main hall of the lodge with Kelvin, both of them still covered in the evidence of the night's violence, neither quite sure how to navigate this fragile new beginning. "You should rest," Kelvin said quietly, his voice careful, like he was afraid of spooking her. "There are guest quarters upstairs. Private. Comfortable. You'll be safe there. Guest quarters. Not his rooms. Not a shared space." He was giving her distance, respecting the boundaries she'd set. Something in Martha's chest loosened at the consideration. "I'm not tired," she said, which was a lie. She was exhausted down to her bones. But sleep felt impossible right now, with adrenaline still singing through her veins and questions still burning in her mind. "You said no more secrets. That you'd tell me everything." Kelvin's expression shifted, something complex moving across his features. Resignation, maybe. Or relief that she was asking instead of running. "I did say that." He moved toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall, adding wood to the banked coals. Flames caught and spread, casting golden light across the hall. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Martha moved closer to the fire, drawn by its warmth, by the promise of something steady in the chaos. "Start with Elena. Your mate. Tell me what really happened." She saw him tense, saw his hands still on the poker he'd been using to arrange the logs. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Might say it was too personal, too painful. But he'd promised honesty. And Kelvin Silvercrest, whatever his faults, seemed to keep his promises. He set the poker aside and sank down onto the fur rug in front of the fire, his movements heavy with exhaustion and old grief. After a moment's hesitation, Martha joined him, sitting close enough to see his expression, but far enough to run if this conversation went wrong. "Elena was the daughter of an allied alpha," Kelvin began, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Our match was political at first. A union meant to strengthen bonds between territories. I was 22 and arrogant enough to think I didn't need a mate. That love was a weakness I couldn't afford." He smiled, sad and self-deprecating. "She proved me wrong within a month. She was fierce and brilliant and refused to let me hide behind strategy and control. She'd call me on my bullshit, push back when I got too cold, remind me that the wolves I ruled were people, not chess pieces." His voice roughened. "She made me better. Made me want to be better." Martha watched the firelight play across his face, saw the love and loss etched into every line. "We were mated for 3 years before the challenge. A rival alpha named Theron thought he saw weakness, thought he could claim my territory. Elena and I were traveling through the borderlands when his forces attacked." Kelvin's hands fisted on his thighs. "I was fighting 3 of his warriors when Theron went for me directly. Silver-tipped blade, aimed for my heart. I would have died." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Elena threw herself between us. Took the blade meant for me. It pierced her lung, nicked her heart. She was dead before she hit the ground." Martha's chest ached with sympathetic pain. She'd lost her mother, knew the specific devastation of loving someone and losing them too soon. "Corvin said you stepped over her body. That you didn't mourn." Kelvin's laugh was bitter, broken. "I killed Theron while her blood was still warm on my hands. Tore him apart in front of his warriors. Then I hunted down everyone involved in planning the attack and made sure they understood what it cost to take someone I loved from me." His eyes met hers, haunted. "But I didn't cry. Didn't break. Didn't let myself feel it because if I started, I was afraid I'd never stop." He looked back at the fire, his jaw tight. So I went cold instead. Turned all that grief into something useful. Strategy. Conquest. Making sure I was so powerful, so feared, that no one would ever dare attack what was mine again. His voice cracked. But you can't grieve your way into numbness forever. Eventually, you just become the weapon you pretended to be. And I did. For 5 years, I was exactly what the story said. Cold. Ruthless. More king than man. Martha understood. Maybe better than anyone. She'd done the same thing after her mother died. Turned pain into survival. Locked away the soft parts of herself where they couldn't be used against her. Until you found me, she said quietly. Until you saved me in the rain. Kelvin's eyes found hers again, and the vulnerability there took her breath. You looked at me like I was worth mercy. Like my life mattered beyond what I could do or command. And for the first time since Elena died, I felt something other than emptiness. He shifted slightly closer, his movement careful, asking permission with his body language. You made me remember what it felt like to want to protect someone, not because they were useful, but because they mattered. Because losing them would hurt worse than any blade. His voice dropped lower, intimate and rough. You scared me, Martha. You still scare me. Because caring about you means I have something to lose again. Means I'm vulnerable again. Is that why you researched the binding? The question came out softer than she intended. Because you were afraid of caring too much? Kelvin was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how much truth to give her. Partly, he admitted finally. I told myself I was researching to understand the prophecy, to know what you were capable of. But underneath that, he exhaled slowly. I think part of me wanted insurance. A way to make sure you couldn't leave. Couldn't choose to walk away and take this feeling with you. The honesty landed in her chest, painful but real. That's fucked up, Martha said bluntly. I know. Kelvin didn't flinch from the accusation. I know it is. That's why I burned the research. Why I'm giving you the choice now. Because you deserve better than someone trying to control you out of fear. You deserve someone willing to risk the pain of losing you in exchange for the privilege of knowing you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his fingers against her cheek. So that's what I'm trying to be. Someone worthy of your trust. Even if it terrifies me. Martha's breath caught at the touch, at the rawness in his voice. She could feel the truth of his words in the way his hand trembled slightly. In the way he looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous in equal measure. I'm scared too, she whispered. Of my power. Of the prophecy. Of caring about someone who has 100 reasons to use me and is choosing not to. Then we're both terrified. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, the gesture achingly gentle. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means we understand what's at stake. Martha found herself leaning into his touch, her body making decisions her mind was still processing. Tell me about the packs you conquered. About Clearwater and the others. I need to know if what Corvin showed me was real. She felt Kelvin tense, felt him wanting to pull away from the difficult truth. But to his credit, he didn't. Some of it was real, he said quietly. I did absorb smaller packs into my territory. Did use force when alphas refused to submit peacefully. But I never targeted children. Never took hostages or destroyed villages for sport. His hand dropped from her face, and he looked back at the fire. Clearwater's alpha was trafficking wolves. Selling young females to the highest bidder, using his pack as a hunting ground for the corrupt and powerful. When I received evidence, I gave him a choice, submit to my authority and face justice, or fight and face execution. Kelvin's voice went cold with remembered anger. He chose to fight. His warriors chose to defend him. We put them down, and I took the surviving pack members into my territory. Gave them protection. Safety. A chance to heal. He met her eyes again. Sable was one of them. But Corvin got to her first. Fed her a twisted version of events before my people could reach her. Used her trauma to build sympathy for his cause. Pain flickered across his expression. I should have protected her better. Should have made sure she knew the truth. That failure is mine to own. Martha studied his face, searching for deception. She found only guilt and grim honesty. Why didn't you tell her the truth when you had the chance? Because she wasn't ready to hear it. Because sometimes trauma needs time before truth can land. Kelvin's voice softened. I was planning to give her space to heal first. Let her come to trust on her own timeline. But then Corvin used her against you, and I ran out of time. It made sense. Painful, complicated sense. What about the others? The wolves in Corvin's camp who believed you were a tyrant. Some are there because of lies like Sable's. Others are there because I really did make hard choices that hurt people. Packs I dismantled. Alphas I killed. Warriors who died defending leaders who were corrupt or cruel. He held her gaze steadily. I'm not innocent, Martha. I've done terrible things in the name of order and justice. Made decisions that still haunt me. The difference between me and Corvin is I'm willing to own those choices. To accept that good intentions don't erase the pain I've caused. The honesty was brutal, uncomfortable, and somehow more reassuring than any pretty lie could have been. Martha was quiet for a long moment, processing. Outside, the wind picked up, sending snow flurries against the windows. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence with warmth. My turn, she said finally. Kelvin's eyebrows rose slightly. For what? For secrets. For truth. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. You told me about Elena, about your choices and your grief. So I'll tell you about mine. She felt his attention sharpen, felt him giving her the same focused intensity he'd given the fire. My mother died in a snowstorm 3 years ago. The pack called it an accident, but I know better. Martha's voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened on her knees. She walked into that storm on purpose. Let the cold take her, because raising a cursed daughter in a pack that hated us both had finally broken something inside her. She heard Kelvin's sharp intake of breath, but didn't look at him. I don't blame her. I tried to for a while. Tried to be angry that she left me alone. But mostly I just understood. She'd spent 13 years fighting for me, defending me, loving me despite what I was. And the pack never stopped punishing her for it. Never stopped whispering that she should have drowned me the night the marks appeared. That keeping me alive was selfish and dangerous. A tear tracked down her cheek, hot against her skin. The last thing she said to me was that I should run. That I should leave Thornridge and find somewhere the silver marks would be seen as blessing instead of curse. Martha's voice cracked. But I stayed. Because running felt like admitting she died for nothing. Like abandoning the only place that held memories of her. She finally looked at Kelvin and saw tears tracking down his face too. I stayed for 3 more years. Made myself small and useful and quiet. Let them treat me like a monster because at least it meant I was still there. Still existing in the space where she loved me. Her laugh was bitter. And then I saved that child and they decided I was too dangerous to keep alive. All those years of trying to prove I wasn't a threat, and one act of healing condemned me. Kelvin moved closer, eliminating the careful distance between them. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and Martha let herself break. She cried for her mother. For the years of isolation. For the girl she'd been before the marks appeared. For every moment of kindness she'd given a pack that returned only fear. And Kelvin held her through it all, his hand stroking her hair, his voice a low rumble against her ear. You deserved better. You deserved a pack that celebrated you. A mother who got to watch you grow into your power. A childhood that wasn't stolen by fear and superstition. His arms tightened. I can't give you those things back. Can't undo what was done to you. But I can make sure no one ever treats you like you're something to be ashamed of again. Martha pulled back enough to see his face, saw the fierce protectiveness there, the rage on her behalf. You can't fight the whole world for me. Watch me. There was no humor in his voice. Just absolute certainty. Anyone who tries to hurt you, to use you, to make you feel less than worthy, they'll answer to me. And I promise you, Martha, they won't like my answers. It should have scared her. The intensity of his conviction. The barely leashed violence in his tone. Instead, it made her feel safe, seen, valued in a way she hadn't experienced since her mother died. I don't need you to fight for me, she said softly. I need you to fight with me, to help me become strong enough to protect myself." Something shifted in Kelvin's expression. Respect and desire and something deeper. "Then that's what I'll do. I'll teach you to control your power. To shift. To be the weapon they feared and the healer you choose to be." His hand cupped her face again, his touch reverent. "I'll help you become everything the prophecy promised and nothing it tried to force you into." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." Kelvin was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her cheek that made her skin tingle. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who chose kindness when the world taught her cruelty. Who saved a stranger in the rain when she had every reason to keep running. Who stood up to a king and demanded honesty when lies would have been easier." His voice dropped lower, intimate and rough. "I see someone whose heart is stronger than her power. And that's rarer than any prophecy." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Martha's breath hitched. "I see you, Martha. Not the marks. Not the prophecy. Not the weapon or the victim or the curse." His eyes held hers, gray as storms and just as intense. "Just you. Brave and broken and beautiful. And I." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "You what?" Her heart was hammering now, caught between fear and hope. "I'm falling for you." The confession came out raw, almost angry. "I know it's too soon. I know you don't trust me yet. I know I have no right to feel this way after keeping secrets. But I can't help it. Every moment with you makes me feel more alive than I've felt in 5 years. More human than king. More hopeful than empty." His hand trembled against her skin. "So I see you. All of you. The scared girl and the powerful woman. The healer and the warrior. The wolf who can't shift and the silver wolf who's going to change everything." His voice broke. "And I'm terrified of how much I want to keep seeing you. Keep knowing you. Keep earning the right to stand beside you." The words landed in Martha's chest like falling stars, bright and burning and impossible to ignore. She should pull away. Should maintain distance. Should remember that kings were dangerous and caring was weakness and trust took time to rebuild. But his eyes held such desperate honesty, such raw vulnerability, like he was handing her his heart and trusting her not to destroy it, the same way she'd trusted him with her wounds in that cave. Martha lifted her hand slowly and pressed it against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palm. "I'm falling too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." Kelvin's breath caught. His hand covered hers, holding it against his heart. "Then we'll be terrified together." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, time to say no, time to choose safety over risk. Martha closed the distance instead. Their lips met softly at first. Tentative. Testing. Like they were both afraid the other might disappear if they pushed too hard. But then Kelvin's hand slid into her hair, and Martha's fingers fisted in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. Like they were both drowning and had finally found air. He tasted like smoke and snow and promises that might be lies but felt like truth. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that matched the empty ache in her chest, and Martha let herself fall into it. Let herself stop thinking and just feel. Feel wanted. Feel valued. Feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kelvin's eyes had gone dark with desire and something deeper. "Stay with me tonight," he said quietly. "Not as obligation. Not as politics. Just stay. Let me hold you. Let us both pretend the world isn't waiting outside to tear this apart." It was a terrible idea. She barely knew him. Barely trusted him. Caring about him was dangerous and complicated and likely to end in heartbreak. But Martha was tired of being careful. Tired of protecting herself at the cost of ever feeling anything real. "Okay," she whispered, and let the Alpha King who'd been falling apart at the seams pull her close and hold her like she was the only thing keeping him together. They fell asleep on the fur rug in front of the fire, wrapped around each other, two broken wolves finding temporary peace in the warmth between them. Outside, the snow fell faster. and in the distance, forces that feared the prophecy began to move. 3 days of peace. That's all they got. 3 days of Kelvin teaching Martha to control the silver fire that lived in her veins. 3 days of quiet meals and long conversations and stolen moments by the fire where the world felt small enough to manage. 3 days of learning what it felt like to be touched with reverence instead of fear. 3 days of believing maybe the prophecy was wrong. Maybe they could write a different ending. Then the council came. Martha woke to the sound of wolves arriving, dozens of them based on the cacophony of voices and footsteps echoing through the lodge. She'd fallen asleep in Kelvin's bed after their training session the previous night, exhausted from learning to manifest her power without letting it consume her. He'd held her while she slept, his arms a barrier between her and nightmares. Now those arms tensed around her, and she felt him go rigid with the kind of alertness that came from recognizing a threat. What's happening? Martha's voice was rough with sleep. The High Council. Kelvin's tone had gone flat, emotionless. The king replacing the man who'd whispered promises against her skin. I called them here to address Corvin's execution and the matter of his followers. But they weren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. He sat up, already moving, already calculating. Martha recognized the shift in him, the walls slamming back into place, the vulnerability locked away behind strategy and control. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. Stay here, Kelvin said, pulling on clothes with efficient movements. Let me handle this. I'll explain about you, about the prophecy, about keeping a silver wolf in your bed? The words came out sharper than Martha intended, edged with insecurity she couldn't quite hide. Kelvin stopped, turned to face her, and for a moment the man broke through the king's mask. About finding someone who matters more than politics. Someone I'm choosing to protect regardless of what the prophecy says. He crossed back to the bed and cupped her face in his hands. Trust me. Please. Let me do this the right way. Martha wanted to believe that he could navigate council politics and keep her safe simultaneously. But 3 days of peace didn't erase a lifetime of learning that wolves in power cared more about stability than individual lives. What if they demand you hand me over? Then I refuse. And if they threaten war? Rebellion? If keeping me costs you your throne? Kelvin's eyes held hers, steady and certain. Then I lose the throne. You're not negotiable, Martha. Not anymore. The declaration should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a noose tightening. Because kings who lost thrones didn't just walk away peacefully. They died. Their supporters died. Territories burned. And it would all be because of her. Before she could voice any of this, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp. Urgent. My king. The voice belonged to one of Kelvin's advisors, a wolf named Garrick who Martha had met briefly. The council is convening in the Great Hall. They're demanding your immediate presence. And... He hesitated. They know about the silver wolf. Someone informed them. Kelvin's expression went cold as winter. Who? Unknown. But the counselors are concerned. High Priestess Marana is calling for an emergency tribunal. The words landed like stones in ice water. Martha knew what tribunals meant. She'd faced one in Thornridge before she ran. They were trials in name only. The verdict was always decided before the accused even spoke. I'm coming with you, she said, already moving to get dressed. Martha. No. She pulled on the clothes Kelvin had provided, simple but well-made, nothing like the rags she'd worn when they met. If they're putting me on trial, I face them. I won't hide while you fight my battles. She saw him wanting to argue, saw the protective instinct warring with respect for her choice. Together then, he said finally. But stay close to me. The council can be. He searched for the right word. Treacherous. The Great Hall was already full when they arrived. Martha had never seen so many powerful wolves in one place. Alphas from the 6 major packs that comprised Kelvin's territory, all wearing formal regalia that marked their status. Council members in ceremonial robes. Advisors and warriors lining the walls. And at the far end, seated on a raised dais, the High Priestess Marana. She was ancient, old enough that her hair had gone pure white, her skin mapped with wrinkles that spoke of centuries lived. But her eyes were sharp as blades, missing nothing, and when they fixed on Martha, she felt the weight of judgment that had condemned her kind 300 years ago. The conversations died the moment Kelvin entered with Martha at his side. The silence that followed was oppressive, suffocating. Martha could feel every eye on her, could see the fear and suspicion and hunger in the faces surrounding them. Some looked at her like she was a threat to be eliminated. Others like she was a prize to be claimed. None looked at her like she was a person. Kelvin's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture that was both comfort and claim. She felt the power radiating from him, not threatening, but present. A reminder that she was under his protection. High Priestess. Kelvin's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I wasn't expecting the council for another day. To what do I owe this early arrival? Marana stood, her movement slow but deliberate. When she spoke, her voice filled the hall despite its quiet tone. We received concerning reports, my king. Reports that you've been harboring a silver wolf. That you executed Corvin Blackthorn without trial. That you've been making decisions that affect all our territories without consulting the council. Her eyes never left Martha. We came early to verify these claims and address them before they destabilize everything we've built. I executed a traitor who attacked me, destroyed packs in my territory, and attempted to bind a wolf against her will. Kelvin's tone remained calm, but Martha could feel the anger simmering beneath. That's within my rights as Alpha King. Perhaps. Marana descended from the dais slowly, like a predator approaching prey. But harboring a silver wolf without informing the council? That's a different matter entirely. She stopped a few feet from Martha, her gaze raking over the silver marks visible on Martha's forearms. The old blood. Awake after 3 centuries. The priestess's voice carried something between awe and horror. Do you know what your kind did, child? The destruction they caused before we were forced to end their line. I know the stories. Martha kept her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. I also know stories can be twisted to serve whoever's telling them. A ripple of shock went through the assembled wolves. No one spoke to the high priestess that way. Marana's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Respect or rage, impossible to tell. Bold, just like your ancestors. She turned to address the council. The prophecy is clear. A silver wolf's awakening signals either our salvation or our destruction. We cannot afford to wait and discover which. We must act now while the power is still nascent. Still controllable. Controllable how? Kelvin's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Through binding, of course. Marana said it like it was obvious. Like discussing magical enslavement was a normal political topic. The ancient rituals still exist. We bind her power to the council's will. That way, if she truly is meant to be our salvation, we can guide her appropriately. And if she's meant to be our destruction. The priestess smiled, cold and certain. We'll have the means to stop her before she burns us all. Horror flooded through Martha. This was what Corvin had planned. What Kelvin had researched. And now the entire High Council was proposing it like it was a reasonable solution. No. Kelvin's single word cracked through the hall like thunder. Martha is under my protection. She will not be bound. Not by the council. Not by anyone. With respect, my king, this isn't your decision alone. One of the alphas spoke up, a scarred warrior named Theron who led the Eastern Pack. The Silver Wolf affects all our territories. All our futures. You can't claim sole authority over something that could destroy us all. I can and I am. Kelvin's power flared, pressing against every wolf in the hall. Dominance and authority and absolute command. Martha is a person, not a weapon. She has rights. Autonomy. And I will not allow this council to enslave her because you're too afraid to see past your own prejudices. Afraid? Marana's voice sharpened. We're being cautious, which is more than can be said for you. You've grown attached to her. We can all see it. But attachment clouds judgment, my king. It makes you vulnerable. Weak. I'm not weak. Kelvin's voice dropped to something deadly. I'm choosing to be better than the fear that drove our ancestors to genocide. I'm choosing to give Martha the chance to prove the prophecy can be more than destruction or control. And if you're wrong? Another counselor spoke up. If she loses control, if the power consumes her and she burns through our territories like her ancestors did, then I'll stop her. Kelvin's hand tightened on Martha's. But we don't get to punish her for crimes she hasn't committed. We don't get to enslave her because of what she might become. Marana shook her head slowly. You've already lost your objectivity. She's compromised you, just like the prophecy warned. The one who claims the silver flame will be either exalted or destroyed by it. You're choosing exaltation without considering the cost. The prophecy is metaphor, not mandate. The prophecy is truth. Marana's voice rose, echoing through the hall. Every word has come to pass exactly as written. The old blood awakening. The Alpha King finding her. The bond forming between them. It's all unfolding exactly as foretold. Which means the ending will unfold the same way. She turned to face Martha directly, her expression grave. You will either save us or damn us, child. There is no middle ground. And history says the Silver Wolves always chose damnation in the end. Always let their power consume them until there was nothing left but ash and screaming. I'm not my ancestors. Martha found her voice, forced it steady despite the terror thrumming through her veins. I've spent my entire life controlling power I didn't understand, surviving in a pack that hated me, choosing compassion when cruelty would have been easier. I'm not going to lose myself to the fire just because you've decided that's what the story demands. Noble words. Marana didn't sound convinced. But power doesn't care about intentions. It cares about capacity. And you have the capacity to end us all. She addressed the council again, her voice carrying ceremonial weight. I call for a vote. Do we bind the Silver Wolf for the protection of all territories, or do we trust the Alpha King's judgment and risk everything on hope? No, this couldn't be happening. Martha looked around the hall, saw the fear in the counselors' faces, saw them weighing her life against their security, saw them choosing safety over mercy. All in favor of binding? Marana's voice was implacable. Hands began to rise. One, then another, then a dozen. More than half the council. No. Kelvin's roar shook the rafters. I forbid it. As Alpha King, I have final authority. You had final authority. Marana's interruption was soft, almost gentle. But the moment you chose her over the council's wisdom, you proved you're unfit to make this decision. The law is clear. When an Alpha King is compromised, the council can override his authority for the good of all packs. She pulled out a scroll, ancient parchment that looked like it might crumble to dust. But the words written on it glowed faintly with power that predated any wolf in this hall. The right of necessary action. Used only when an alpha's judgment has been corrupted by mating bonds or magical influence. Marana's eyes held a mix of genuine regret and iron determination. I invoke it now. The council's vote supersedes the king's command. Martha of the Silver Wolf bloodline will be bound for the protection of all territories. The words landed like an execution order. Kelvin moved in front of Martha, his body a shield, his power flaring so intensely the air crackled. You'll have to go through me. We hoped it wouldn't come to this. Marana gestured, and guards began moving forward. Royal guards who served the council, not the king. Wolves Kelvin had fought beside, trained with, trusted. Stand down, my king. Don't make this a coup. Don't force us to remove you for the good of the territories. You're threatening to overthrow me because I won't let you enslave an innocent woman? We're protecting our people from a prophesied threat. The high priestess's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Even if it means protecting them from you. Martha watched it unfold with growing horror. Watched the council close ranks against the king who'd tried to defend her. Watched his own guards hesitate, torn between loyalty to him and duty to the council. Watched everything Kelvin had built begin to crumble because he'd chosen her. Stop. Her voice cut through the rising tension. Just stop. She stepped out from behind Kelvin, ignoring his attempt to pull her back. If I agree to the binding, do you leave him alone? Let him keep his throne and his authority, Martha, no, Kelvin grabbed her arm, his grip desperate. Don't do this. Don't sacrifice yourself for you. She looked up at him, saw the devastation in his eyes, and felt her heart crack. You said you'd lose your throne for me. Let me keep you from having to make that choice. I already made it. His voice broke. I chose you. I'll keep choosing you. Even if it costs me everything. The declaration should have changed things. Should have moved the council to mercy. Instead, Marana smiled sadly. You see? He's completely compromised. The bond has already taken root. If we don't act now, she'll control him completely within a moon cycle. We'll be able to use him as a weapon against anyone who opposes her. That's not Martha started, but the priestess cut her off. Isn't it? You've had him for 3 days, and he's already willing to sacrifice his crown. Give it 3 weeks, and he'll sacrifice his territories. 3 months, and he'll burn the world for you. Marana's voice turned gentle, almost pitying. This is what silver wolves do, child. You might not mean to, but your power calls to the alpha bond. Corrupts it. Turns protective instinct into obsessive devotion. That's why your kind were eliminated. Not because you were evil, but because you were too dangerous to exist alongside other wolves. The words hit like physical blows. Was it true? Had she somehow influenced Kelvin without meaning to? Was the connection between them real, or just her power manipulating his alpha instincts? She looked at him and saw the same question reflected in his eyes. The sudden doubt. The terrible uncertainty. And she hated the council for putting it there. I haven't used my power on him. Martha's voice shook with rage and hurt. I've barely been able to control it at all. Whatever he feels, whatever I feel, it's real. Not manipulation. Not corruption. Just two people who found each other in the worst circumstances and chose to trust anyway. You believe that because you want to. Marana moved closer, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt worse than cruelty. But belief doesn't change nature. Your power seeks to bond with alphas. To create unbreakable loyalty. It's instinct, not choice. And instinct is the most dangerous force of all because it feels like truth. The priestess gestured, and the guards moved forward again. Take her. Gently. We're not monsters. But the binding must happen before she gains enough control to resist it. Kelvin's power exploded outward, dropping half the guards to their knees with the force of his dominance. Touch her and you die. All of you. I don't care if it starts a war. I don't care if it ends my reign. She is mine to protect, and I will paint these halls with the blood of anyone who tries to take her. His eyes had gone completely feral, his wolf rising to the surface, and Martha realized with sick certainty that Marana was right about one thing. Kelvin would destroy everything for her. Would become the monster the stories feared. And it would be her fault. Kelvin. She touched his face, forcing him to look at her instead of the threats surrounding them. Kelvin, please. Don't do this. Don't become what they fear. Don't prove them right about what I do to you. I don't care if they're right. His voice was raw, desperate. I don't care about anything except keeping you safe. Keeping you free. Don't ask me to let them take you. Please. Ask me anything else. Tears streamed down Martha's face. I'm asking you to trust me. To let me handle this my way. Your way gets you bound and enslaved. Maybe. She pressed her forehead against his, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of him, the way his arms felt like home. Or maybe I'm stronger than they think. Maybe I can break a binding the same way I broke suppressant bracelets. Maybe this is how I prove I'm not a victim or a weapon. Just a woman who's tired of being afraid. She pulled back and looked at the council, at Marana, at the guards waiting to drag her away. I'll submit to your binding. Her voice rang clear through the hall. But when I break it, and I will break it, you're going to owe me and every silver wolf you hunted to extinction an apology you can never make sufficient. She looked back at Kelvin one last time, saw him breaking apart, saw him wanting to fight and protect and refuse. Trust me, she whispered. The way I trusted you in the cave. The way you asked me to trust you 3 days ago. Let me be strong enough to save myself. For a long, terrible moment, she thought he'd refuse. Thought he'd fight the entire council and damn the consequences. Then his arms dropped, and he stepped back. The surrender in his posture was the most devastating thing Martha had ever seen. If they hurt you, his voice was barely above a whisper, I will end them all. King or not, council or not, I will burn this world to ash and rule the ruins alone. Do you understand? It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A prophecy of his own. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice. The guards closed in. Gentle, like Marana had ordered, but firm. Unyielding. They led her toward the dais, toward the priestess who waited with ritual tools that gleamed with old magic. And Martha heard Kelvin drop to his knees behind her, heard the sound that tore from his chest, grief and rage and helplessness all mixed together. Heard him break. Just like she was breaking. But she kept walking. Because if loving him meant destroying him, then she'd rather destroy herself first. The council had no idea what they'd just unleashed. They thought they were binding a threat. They'd just created one. The binding chamber was beneath the great hall, a circular room carved from white stone and covered in symbols that made Martha's eyes ache to look at directly. Candles burned at cardinal points, their flames silver instead of gold. The same color as the fire in her veins. Marana worked in silence, drawing symbols on the floor in ash and salt. The other counselors watched from the periphery, their expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to quiet regret. None of them stopped the process. You could make this easier on yourself. The priestess spoke without looking up from her work. Open yourself to the binding. Let it settle naturally instead of fighting it. And let you control me like a puppet? Martha's laugh was sharp, bitter. I don't think so. We don't want to control you. We want to ensure you can't lose control. Marana finished the last symbol and straightened, her ancient joints creaking. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, you're doing exactly what Corvin planned to do. Exactly what you condemned him for. The only difference is you have the council's approval. The difference, Marana said quietly, is that we're doing this to protect thousands of wolves, not to claim power for ourselves. Intent matters, child. Does it? When the result is the same. Martha's hands fisted at her sides. You're still taking my choice. Still treating me like I'm guilty of crimes I haven't committed. The priestess was quiet for a moment, something complicated moving across her weathered face. I knew one of your ancestors. Before the purge. She was kind and brilliant and absolutely certain she could control her power. Marana's voice went distant with memory, right up until the moment she couldn't. Until the fire consumed her during a moment of grief, and she burned through 3 packs before we could stop her. Killed hundreds, including the alpha she loved. She met Martha's eyes, and the pain there was ancient and real. I don't want that for you. Don't want to watch you become what she became. This binding isn't punishment, child. It's mercy. It's giving you a chance to live without fearing yourself. The words landed softer than Martha expected. Not cruel. Just tired. Scared. What if I could prove I won't lose control? What if I could show you that I'm not her? Then the binding would break on its own. Marana gestured at the symbols surrounding them. This magic responds to truth. If you're truly in control, if your heart is as strong as you claim, the binding will recognize it and dissolve. But if there's any darkness, any potential for corruption. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Martha understood. This was a test. One she might fail without ever intending to. And if I fail? If the binding holds, then you serve the council's judgment until we're certain you're safe. Could be a year. Could be a lifetime. Depends on you. A lifetime as a bound weapon. A tool for the council to use however they deemed necessary. The same fate she'd been running from since Thornridge. I need a moment. Martha's voice came out smaller than she intended. Before we start. Just a moment to prepare. Marana studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We begin at moonrise. You have until then. The priestess left, followed by the other counselors. The guards remained, watching Martha from the doorway. Not hostile. Just present. Making sure she didn't run. Martha sank down in the center of the circle, surrounded by symbols designed to contain her, and finally let herself admit the truth. She was terrified. Not of the binding, not of the council, of herself, of the power coiled in her chest that wanted to rise and burn and prove Marana right, of the possibility that everything they feared about her was true, that loving Kelvin had corrupted her judgment, that caring for Sable and wanting to protect the innocent was just her power's way of gathering more wolves to burn when she eventually lost control. What if she really was cursed? What if mercy and kindness were just the mask her power wore before it destroyed everything? Silver fire flickered to life around her hands, unconscious, responding to her spiraling thoughts. Martha stared at the flames, beautiful and terrible, and wondered if Marana's ancestor had sat like this once. Wondering if she was a person or just a weapon waiting to detonate. Wondered if love made you stronger or just gave you more to lose when the fire finally won. Outside the binding chamber, she heard footsteps. Felt a familiar presence that made her heart clench. Kelvin. He appeared in the doorway, and the guards moved to stop him. 5 minutes. His voice carried absolute authority, despite the devastation in his eyes. Give us 5 minutes, or I start breaking bones. The guards looked at each other, then stepped back. Apparently, even guards loyal to the council knew when an Alpha King was beyond reason. Kelvin crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside Martha, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers desperately. Run. The word was barely a whisper. I have horses ready. Supplies. A safe house in the Southern Territories where the council has no authority. We can disappear. Start over. I don't need a throne if I have you. The offer cracked something in Martha's chest. You'd give up everything? Your territories, your people, your purpose? For me. Without hesitation. His thumbs brushed away the tears on her cheeks. Without regret. You're worth more than all of it. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to run with him into the night and pretend they could escape prophecies and politics and all the forces aligned against them. But she'd spent her whole life running. And she was tired. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't let you sacrifice everything because the council is afraid of me. And I can't keep running from what I am. At some point, I have to stand and prove I'm more than their fear. You don't have to prove anything to them. I have to prove it to myself. She pressed her hand over his where it still cradled her face. I need to know if I'm strong enough to survive this. If my heart is stronger than my power. If loving you is real or just my bloodline corrupting your alpha bond. Pain flashed across Kelvin's features. You still think that might be true? After everything. I don't know what to think anymore. The admission tasted like ash. But I need to find out. Need to face the binding and see if I'm the person I think I am or the monster they fear. Kelvin pulled her against his chest, his arms crushing her close, his face buried in her hair. You're not a monster. You've never been a monster. And whatever happens in there, whatever that binding does or doesn't do, it won't change how I feel about you. His voice cracked. Do you hear me? Nothing changes what we are to each other. Martha held onto him like he was the only solid thing in a world dissolving into chaos. Promise me something. Anything. If the binding holds, if I become what they fear, promise you'll stop me. That you won't let your feelings turn you into what Marana described. That you'll be strong enough to end this if I can't. Martha. Promise me, Kelvin. She pulled back to look at him, saw the agony in his eyes. Because if I lose myself to the fire, I don't want to destroy you too. I'd rather die than hurt you. For a long moment, he just stared at her, clearly torn between promising and refusing. Then he nodded, the movement small and broken. I promise. If you become a threat, which you won't, I'll stop you. His voice dropped to barely audible. But it will kill me. You need to know that. Losing you will end me just as thoroughly as any blade. Then we both better hope I'm as strong as I think I am. She kissed him then. Desperate and fierce and full of all the things she couldn't say. All the hope and terror and love she hadn't had time to name properly. Kelvin kissed her back like he was drowning and she was air. Like he could somehow pull her soul into his body and keep it safe from what was coming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marana's voice echoed from the doorway. It's time. Kelvin's arms tightened one last time, then released her. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and Martha saw him memorizing her, cataloging every detail like he thought this might be the last time. I love you. The words fell between them like stones in water. I don't care if it's too soon or if the binding proves its corruption. I love you, Martha. And I'll keep loving you no matter what happens next. The confession shattered the last of her composure. I love you too, she whispered. That's why I have to do this. Because loving you means being strong enough to protect you, even from myself. She watched him leave, watched him force himself to walk away when every instinct screamed at him to fight. Watched the guards close the door behind him. And then Marana began the ritual. Pain, silver fire, and binding magic twisting together in her veins. The priestess chanting in the old tongue, words that predated language, that spoke directly to the marrow of Martha's bones. She tried to stay calm, tried to open herself to the binding like Marana suggested, but her power had other ideas. The silver fire rose like a tidal wave, fighting the binding magic, burning through the symbols meant to contain it. Martha screamed, felt her skin ignite, felt the marks on her arms spread across her chest, her neck, her face. Felt something vast and ancient wake inside her. The silver wolf bloodline, dormant for 300 years, rising to meet a threat it recognized. Enslavement. The fire exploded outward, shattering the binding circle, cracking the stone floor. Marana stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been vindication. See? The prophecy is true. She can't be controlled. Can't be contained. She'll burn us all. But Martha wasn't trying to burn. She was trying desperately to pull the power back, to rein it in, to prove she was stronger than her bloodline's instinct. It wasn't working. The fire kept spreading, kept consuming, kept proving everyone's worst fears. And in the distance, she heard Kelvin roar her name. Heard him coming for her despite the promise she'd made him make. Heard her heart breaking as the world dissolved into silver flame and screaming. The fire was going to kill her. Martha could feel it eating through her veins like acid, like lightning, like every star in the sky condensed into her mortal body and demanding release. The binding hadn't contained her power, it had enraged it, provoked it, turned what should have been a controlled manifestation into an explosion that was tearing her apart from the inside. The chamber walls cracked. Stone groaned. The ancient symbols Marana had drawn shattered into ash. And still the fire grew. Martha was dimly aware of screaming, hers, she thought, though it sounded too raw to be human. Aware of the guards fleeing. Of Marana backing toward the door, her face caught between horror and grim satisfaction. See? This is what silver wolves become. This is why they had to die. But beneath the pain and the terror and the fire consuming her flesh, Martha felt something else. A choice. The power wasn't controlling her. It was responding to her fear, to her certainty that she would fail, to every voice that had ever called her cursed and dangerous and wrong. The fire was her pain made manifest, her rage at being hunted, her grief at losing her mother, her fury at being treated like a weapon instead of a person. It wasn't evil. It was just hers. And she could choose what to do with it. The realization cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Martha stopped fighting the fire. Stopped trying to suppress it or contain it or make it smaller. Instead, she pulled it close. Wrapped her consciousness around the flames and whispered to them like they were frightened children instead of destructive force. I see you. I know you. You're not wrong. You're just scared. Just angry. Just tired of being something everyone fears. Me too. The fire hesitated. Flickered. Like it was listening. But we don't have to be what they think we are. We don't have to prove them right. We can be something new. Something they've never seen before. She thought of Kelvin's face when he'd confessed he loved her. Thought of Sable's hollow eyes learning to hope again. Thought of every wolf the council had hurt in the name of safety. Thought of every person her power could help instead of harm. We can be healers. Protectors. We can burn away the rot without destroying the garden. We can be fire that warms instead of fire that consumes. We can choose. The silver flames around her began to change. Still bright. Still powerful. But different somehow. Controlled. Purposeful. They stopped spreading and started gathering. Coalescing around Martha like armor instead of chaos. Sinking back into her skin, into her bones, into the marks that had defined her since she was 13. The pain began to fade. In its place, clarity. Strength. The absolute certainty of someone who'd finally stopped running from themselves. Martha stood slowly, her body still wreathed in silver fire, but no longer burning. The flames moved with her breath, responded to her thoughts, became an extension of her will instead of a force she fought. She looked at Marana and saw the priestess's shock. Her fear. "I'm not going to hurt you," Martha said quietly. Her voice echoed with power, with something ancient and terrible and beautiful. "I'm not going to hurt anyone. But I'm also not going to let you bind me." She raised her hand, and the silver fire pooled in her palm like liquid starlight. This power isn't a curse. It's a gift. One my ancestors were killed for before they could learn to wield it properly. Before they could prove it could be used for more than destruction. She closed her fist, and the fire extinguished. "I'm going to prove it. Right now." "Child," Marana started, but Martha was already moving. She walked past the priestess, past the guards who'd returned with weapons drawn, past the counselors watching from the doorway. Walked up the stairs to the great hall where she could feel Kelvin's presence like a beacon. He was surrounded by his own guards, held back by wolves whose loyalty to the council outweighed their loyalty to him. She could see the violence radiating from him, could see him seconds away from tearing through anyone who stood between him and her. Their eyes met across the hall, and Martha watched the relief crash into him like a physical wave. "I'm okay." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm in control. The binding didn't work because I don't need it. I'm not corrupted or dangerous or any of the things you fear. You just destroyed the binding chamber," one of the counselors started. "I defended myself against magic meant to enslave me." Martha's voice carried absolute authority now, echoed with power that made every wolf in the hall recognize her as something other than victim. "But I'm still here. Still sane. Still choosing mercy even though every one of you would have taken my freedom without a second thought." She walked toward the center of the hall, toward the space between Kelvin and the council. "You want proof I'm not a threat? Fine. I'll give you proof." She closed her eyes and reached for the power coiled in her chest. Not to attack. Not to defend. To heal. Silver fire poured from her hands and spread across the floor in a wave that made the assembled wolves gasp and stumble back. But the flames didn't burn. They washed over the guards who'd been injured restraining Kelvin, over counselors nursing old wounds, over servants watching from the periphery who carried scars from battles and accidents and cruelty. And everywhere the fire touched, flesh knit back together. Scars faded. Pain dissolved. The wave of healing spread beyond the hall, beyond the lodge, rippling out across the territory in a pulse of silver light that every wolf for miles would feel. Martha opened her eyes and found the hall in absolute silence. The guards who'd been bleeding were whole. The counselors who'd carried old injuries stood straighter, their faces slack with shock. Even Marana touched her arthritic hands with wonder, flexing fingers that hadn't moved freely in decades. "This is what Silver Wolf power can do," Martha said quietly. "Not just destroy. Not just burn. Heal. Mend. Make broken things whole again." She turned to address the council directly. "You've spent 300 years telling yourselves we were monsters who had to be eliminated. But you never asked what we could have become if you'd given us the chance to be more than your fear." She walked toward Marana, watched the ancient priestess tense, clearly expecting attack. Martha stopped a foot away and extended her hand. "I'm not my ancestors. I'm not going to make you pay for their deaths or your role in perpetuating the fear that killed them. But I am going to ask you to make a different choice than the one you made 300 years ago." "What choice?" Marana's voice was hoarse. Trust. Let me prove that the prophecy doesn't have to be about destruction or enslavement. Let me show you what happens when you give a silver wolf the freedom to choose her own path. Martha kept her hand extended, kept her expression open. Let me be what I want to be. A healer. A protector. Someone who uses her power to help instead of harm. The priestess stared at that outstretched hand for a long moment. And if you lose control? If the darkness your ancestor fell defines you, then I'll have people around me who care enough to pull me back. Who see me as a person worth saving, not just a threat to eliminate. Martha glanced at Kelvin, saw the fierce pride in his expression. I'll have something my ancestors never had. A choice about who I become. Marana's hand trembled as she reached out. Their palms met, and Martha felt the old magic in the priestess, recognized the new power in her blood. Felt the moment the fear shifted into something else. Not quite trust. Not yet. But possibility. You're either very brave or very foolish, Marana said quietly. Probably both. Martha smiled, sad and hopeful. But I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of making myself small to comfort people who've already decided I'm dangerous. So I'm going to be big instead. Powerful. Everything they feared. And I'm going to use that power to prove them wrong. She released the priestess's hand and turned to face the assembled council. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you how this is going to be. I stay in Kelvin-S territory as a free wolf. I train to control my power. And I use it to help the packs you're supposed to protect. Heal the injured. Defend against threats. Be the salvation the prophecy mentioned instead of the destruction you expect. And in exchange, one of the alphas asked. In exchange, you leave me alone. No more binding attempts. No more tribunals. No more treating me like I'm guilty of crimes I haven't committed. Her voice hardened. And if anyone tries to hurt me, tries to use me, tries to control me like Corvin did, they answer to him. She gestured at Kelvin, who was watching her with an expression caught between awe and desire, and something that looked dangerously close to worship. Because I might be powerful, Martha continued, but he's still the Alpha King. And anyone who comes for me comes for us both. Understand? The threat hung in the air, backed by silver fire and royal authority. The council exchanged glances. Uncertain, afraid, but also impressed. It was Theron, the scarred Eastern Alpha, who spoke first. The girl has spine. I'll give her that. He looked at Marana. The healing she just performed would have taken our best healers weeks to accomplish. If she's willing to use that power in service to the territories, it could change everything, another counselor finished. Heal wounds we thought permanent. Save wolves we've been losing to injuries and illness. Or it could be a trick. The voice came from the back, and Alpha Martha didn't recognize. A way to gain our trust before she turns on us. Martha met his eyes steadily. You're right. It could be. You have no guarantee that I won't lose control or turn destructive. No promises except my word. She let silver fire dance across her fingertips, beautiful and deadly. But you also have no guarantee that binding me or killing me won't create the exact threat you're trying to prevent. Maybe the prophecy says I'll destroy you because you keep trying to destroy me first. Maybe it's a self-fulfilling cycle and someone needs to be brave enough to break it. The truth of it settled over the hall like snow. Marana sighed, the sound heavy with centuries of decisions that had seemed right at the time. The prophecy has been interpreted the same way for 300 years. But perhaps. She looked at Martha with something between respect and resignation. Perhaps we've been reading our own fears into it instead of seeing what it actually says. She pulled out the ancient scroll again, the one that had condemned Martha's ancestors. She who bears the silver flame shall rise when all hope is ash. She who is cast out shall return crowned in starfire. She who they named cursed shall be their salvation, or their ending. The priestess looked up, her ancient eyes sharp. We always focused on the ending, on the threat. But the prophecy gives equal weight to salvation. And salvation requires risk. Requires faith in the face of fear. She turned to the council. I vote we accept her terms. Let the Silver Wolf prove herself freely. And if she truly is our ending, at least we'll face it knowing we chose hope over fear for once. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Then Theron stepped forward. I vote yes. Let her prove herself. Another alpha. Yes. Another. Agreed. One by one, the council members who'd voted to bind her changed their votes. Not all of them, some still looked at Martha with suspicion that might never fade. But enough. More than enough. Marana nodded slowly. Then it's decided. Martha of the Silver Wolf bloodline will remain free, under the Alpha King's protection, with the Council's conditional acceptance. We will reconvene in 1 year to assess her progress and her threat level. She met Martha's eyes. Don't make us regret this, Mercy, child. I won't. Martha's voice carried the weight of a vow. I'll prove that Silver Wolves can be trusted. That we can be more than your nightmares. The council began to disperse, some still grumbling, others looking thoughtful. The crisis had passed. The immediate threat dissolved into uneasy truce. And Kelvin crossed the hall in 4 long strides and pulled Martha into his arms. He didn't say anything, just held her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had almost collapsed. His face buried in her hair, his hands trembling against her back, his breath ragged with relief and residual terror. Martha clung to him just as tightly, finally letting herself feel the fear she'd been holding back. Finally letting herself break now that the performance was over. I thought I'd lost you. His voice was wrecked, barely above a whisper. When the binding chamber exploded, when I felt your power surge, I thought. I know. She pulled back enough to see his face, saw the tear tracks cutting through the grime. But I'm okay. I figured it out. The power isn't evil, Kelvin. It's just mine. And I get to decide what to do with it. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. What you did in there, the healing, the speech, standing up to the council without backing down, his voice cracked. You were magnificent. Terrifying and beautiful and so fucking brave I could barely breathe. I was terrified the entire time. I know. That's what made it brave. He pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. I love you. I love you so much it actually hurts. And I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. Sorry I let them take you, let them try to bind you. You gave me the space to save myself. Martha interrupted him gently. That's what I needed. Not rescuing. Not protecting. Just the faith that I was strong enough to survive. His eyes opened, gray as winter storms and full of emotions she couldn't name. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. Stronger than me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again. He kissed her then, and it tasted like promises and hope and the kind of love that survived trials by fire. Around them, the hall was empty now. The guards had left. The council had retreated to their quarters. Even the servants had made themselves scarce. It was just them, standing in the wreckage of a crisis that had almost destroyed everything, holding on to each other like they could prevent the world from ever coming between them again. What happens now? Martha asked when they finally broke apart. Now, Kelvin's smile was small but real. Now I help you train. Help you master your power so thoroughly that no one ever questions your control again. Help you become everything you want to be. And what do you want me to be? His hand traced down her cheek, along her jaw, coming to rest over her heart. Mine, if you'll have me. Not because of alpha bonds or prophecies or political necessity. Just because we choose each other. Every day. Despite the fear and the danger and all the ways this could end badly. Martha covered his hand with hers, feeling both their heartbeats. I choose you, she said quietly. I choose this. Whatever comes next. Then we face it together. Kelvin pulled her close again, and Martha let herself sink into his warmth. No more secrets. No more running. Just us against whatever the prophecy has left to throw at us. It should have felt naive. Foolish. They'd barely survived this crisis, and there would be more. The council's acceptance was conditional. There were still wolves who feared her. Still enemies who would see her power as something to claim or destroy. But standing in Kelvin's arms, with silver fire warming her veins and the memory of healing magic spreading through the territory, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind that shatters at the first sign of trouble. The fierce, stubborn kind that survives everything. The kind that changes the world. In the days that followed, word of what happened spread through all 6 territories like wildfire. The silver wolf who'd broken a binding. Who'd healed hundreds with a wave of power. Who'd faced down the High Council and emerged free. Some wolves whispered in fear. Others in wonder. But all of them knew one thing for certain. The prophecy was unfolding. And whatever came next would reshape everything they'd ever known about power and mercy and the thin line between the two. Martha began training in earnest. Learning to shift, not into a regular wolf form, but into something new. Something that glowed with silver fire and moved like lightning given flesh. A form that was both beautiful and deadly, that made even Kelvin's wolf whimper in recognition of something ancient and powerful. She practiced healing, learning to target specific wounds, specific illnesses. Learning to burn away infection without harming healthy flesh. To mend bones that had been broken for years. To ease pain that had become so constant wolves forgot what it felt like to exist without it. She became what the prophecy promised. A force of change. Of transformation. And beside her, Kelvin relearned what it meant to be more than a king. To be a partner. A protector who didn't suffocate. A man who trusted his mate to be powerful in her own right. They weren't perfect. They fought about her taking risks. About him being too protective. About the weight of prophecies and counsels and all the expectations pressing down on them. But they chose each other anyway. Every morning. Every crisis. Every moment when walking away would have been easier than staying. They chose love over fear. And slowly, the territories began to change too. Wolves who'd been injured in battles thought unwinnable were healed. Packs that had been fractured by old grudges found their wounds, physical and emotional, beginning to close. The healing Martha offered wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. A promise that the old ways didn't have to define the future. That mercy could be strength instead of weakness. That power could build instead of only destroy. Not everyone believed. Not everyone trusted. But enough did. Enough to start imagining a world where silver wolves weren't hunted. Where power wasn't feared. Where prophecies became possibilities instead of mandates. A world Martha and Kelvin were building one choice at a time. Together. But peace is a fragile thing in a world built on blood and prophecy. 3 months after Martha broke the binding, a messenger arrived from the Southern Territories. He was young, barely past his first shift, and he carried news that made even Kelvin go pale. The exiled packs, wolves who'd been driven from their homes by the territory wars, were gathering. Building an army. And they weren't looking for reconciliation. They were looking for the silver wolf. Some wanted her as a weapon. A tool to reclaim what they'd lost. Others wanted her dead, believing that eliminating her would break the prophecy before it could destroy what remained of the old order. And leading them was a figure from the ancient stories. An alpha who'd supposedly died in the first silver wolf purge 300 years ago. An alpha who claimed to have bound a silver wolf before. Who knew secrets about their power that even Marana didn't possess. Who was coming to finish what the council had started. Kelvin read the messenger's report, and Martha watched the warrior king resurface. The strategist. The wolf who'd conquered territories through blood and cunning. "We fortify," he said, his voice gone cold with tactical focus. "Pull in the border patrols. Call the allied packs. Prepare for siege." Or, Martha said quietly, "I meet them." Kelvin's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with instant refusal. "Absolutely not. You're not walking into a trap designed specifically for you. I'm not walking into anything. I'm walking toward." She moved to the window, looking out over the territory they'd been healing together. "These wolves are coming because they're afraid. Because they don't know what I am or what I want. So I show them. By offering yourself as a target? By offering them the same choice you gave me. Martha turned to face him, saw the fear and fury warring in his expression. Trust or fear? Mercy or violence? A chance to be part of building something new or clinging to the old ways that destroyed my ancestors. And if they choose violence? Martha's hands ignited with silver fire. Not threatening, just present. A reminder of what she'd become. Then I show them why the Silver Wolf bloodline was feared for 300 years. But I do it protecting people instead of destroying them. I do it choosing who I am instead of becoming what they expect. Kelvin crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, his touch gentle despite the desperation in his eyes. I can't lose you. Not after everything. Not after I just got you back. You won't lose me. Martha covered his hands with hers. But you might have to trust me to fight my own battles. To face the threats that come for me without always standing in the way. That's not fair. You know I can't just. I know. She pulled him close, felt his heart racing against hers. I know it goes against every instinct. But this is my fight, Kelvin. My chance to prove that the prophecy can be more than destruction or salvation. That it can be choice. For a long moment, he just held her, his breath ragged against her hair. Then he pulled back and looked into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. Then we go together. Not me protecting you. Not you facing it alone. Together. As equals. As mates who trust each other to be strong. It wasn't what she'd been asking for. It was better. Together, Martha agreed. And in the distance, an army marched toward them, carrying old hatred and ancient fear and the weight of prophecies written in blood. Carrying the next test. The next choice. The next chance to prove that love could be stronger than legacy. That two broken wolves who'd found each other in a storm could reshape the destiny of all their kind. Or die trying. The silver marks on Martha's arms glowed brighter as the threat approached. Not with fear. Not with rage. With anticipation. Because she'd spent her entire life being afraid of her own power. Being told she was too dangerous to exist. Too cursed to love. Too broken to save. And then a wounded stranger in the rain had looked at her like she was worth mercy. Had given her the space to save him without asking for anything in return. Had taught her that kindness wasn't weakness. That choosing compassion didn't mean choosing to be a victim. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to become the monster everyone expects. Martha stood on the balcony of Kelvin's lodge, looking out over mountains that had become home. Feeling the bond between them humming like electricity in her veins. Knowing that whatever came next would test everything they'd built. Would demand sacrifices neither of them wanted to make. Would force her to choose between the woman she wanted to be and the weapon the prophecy demanded. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced down councils and bindings and her own power threatening to consume her. She'd chosen love when fear would have been easier. She'd proven that silver wolves could heal as well as burn. And she would keep proving it. Every day. Every battle. Every moment someone looked at her and saw a threat instead of a person. She would prove them wrong. Until the day she couldn't anymore. Kelvin came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Martha leaned back into his warmth, into the solid certainty of him. That we're either going to change the world or burn trying. His laugh was soft against her ear. Those are the only two options worth considering. She turned in his arms, looked up at the Alpha King who'd given up his throne in his heart the moment she'd bandaged his wounds, and saw their future written in his eyes. Uncertain. Dangerous. Beautiful. Worth fighting for. "I love you," she said. Not for the first time. But like she meant it more than breathing. "I love you too." He kissed her softly, reverently. "Whatever comes next." "Whatever comes next," she echoed. And somewhere in the distance, an ancient alpha who'd survived 300 years in hiding smiled. The prophecy was unfolding exactly as written. The silver wolf had risen. The Alpha King had claimed her heart. And the world was about to discover whether that bond would save them all. Or end everything in silver fire and screaming. The only question that mattered was simple. Impossible. Devastating. Would you have chosen her side? Even knowing what she could become? Even knowing the prophecy promised destruction as readily as salvation? Would you have seen the girl offering mercy in the rain? Or only the power that could burn the world to ash? Would you have given her the chance to choose? Or decided her fate before she could prove you wrong? Because in the end, that's what every love story built on prophecy and power comes down to. Trust or fear. Hope or certainty. The courage to let someone be powerful and vulnerable and human all at once. To see them. Really see them. Beyond the marks and the magic and the myths. To love them anyway. Martha's story isn't finished. The ancient Alpha is coming. The exiled packs are gathering. And the prophecy that promised her as salvation or destruction is about to demand an answer written in blood and choices that can't be unmade. She'll face enemies who want to use her. Allies who fear her. A power that could save thousands or destroy everything she loves. And through it all, she'll have to remember who she is beneath the silver fire. A girl who chose kindness when the world taught her cruelty. A woman who looked at a wounded king and saw someone worth saving. A silver wolf who refuses to be anyone's weapon. Anyone's victim. Anyone's curse. Just herself. Powerful and broken and brave and terrified and absolutely unwilling to let prophecy dictate her ending. But whether she succeeds, whether love really can rewrite destiny, whether two wolves who found each other in a storm can survive what comes next, that story is still being written. One choice at a time. One battle at a time. One moment of choosing hope over fear. And if this story lit something inside you, if Martha's refusal to be less than everything she has resonated in your chest like recognition, if you want to know whether love really is stronger than prophecy, then subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we don't tell tales about perfect heroines who never doubt themselves. We tell stories about women who are scared and powerful and learning to take up space in a world that wants them small. About men who are broken and trying to be better than their worst impulses. About love that doesn't fix everything but gives you a reason to keep fighting anyway. About prophecies that become possibilities instead of prisons. We tell tales that burn, that nestle into your chest and make you feel too much and wonder what you'd do if destiny came for you with impossible choices. That remind you that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being terrified and choosing mercy anyway. It's about seeing the monster everyone fears and refusing to become it. It's about finding someone who sees you, really sees you, and choosing to be seen anyway. So subscribe. Stay close. Because Martha's story is just beginning. And you're going to want to be there when she faces the ancient Alpha who claims to know how to break her. When Kelvin has to choose between his throne and his heart. When the prophecy demands its final answer. When the girl who saved a stranger in the rain has to decide if mercy is still possible when everything she loves is on the line. You're going to want to be there when she proves, once and for all, that silver wolves were never the monsters. They were just powerful women who refused to apologize for taking up space. And the world has always been terrified of that. Until now. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because some tales don't just entertain. They transform. And this one is just getting started. The fire doesn't consume her anymore. She wears it like a crown. And the world is about to learn what happens when you give a cursed girl the chance to choose her own ending. Salvation. Destruction. Or something the prophecy never imagined. Love that rewrites destiny itself.